Hey guys, today we're going on a journey, not just through time, but through the very fabric of your survival. Imagine, if you will, the scorching sun on your skin, the grit of ancient dust between your toes as you trudge across a landscape that wants you for lunch. You hear the rustle in the tall grass, feel the primal urge to know, friend or foe? You sniff the air, not for a Wi-Fi signal, but for the scent of rain or perhaps something much more menacing. This isn't a Netflix binge. This is your life. And without a very basic, fundamental skill, one that you now take for granted every single moment of your existence, well, you probably wouldn't survive this. We're talking about counting. Simple, right? 1, 2, 3. But for our earliest ancestors, it was the difference between a full belly and starvation, between safety and becoming someone else's dinner. You're out there, a speck in the vast, untamed savanna, and your stomach is rumbling a rhythm as old as time itself. You spot a patch of wild berries. How many do you need to gather to feed your small family, to ensure everyone gets enough sustenance without depleting the bush entirely? You're not pulling out a calculator app here. You're visually estimating, perhaps using your fingers or stacking stones. It's a gut feeling, but also a nascent numerical sense. Then the real prize, tracks, big ones. A herd of woolly mammoths has passed through. You examine the spoor, count the distinct imprints. 2 adults, perhaps a calf? How many days since they were here? Too many, and their trail will be cold. Too few, and you might stumble directly into an unpredictable, colossal beast. This isn't just tracking. It's a rudimentary census of the megafauna. And when the hunt is successful, when that colossal beast is finally brought down, the communal feast begins. But how do you fairly distribute the meat among 50 hungry mouths? You can't just eyeball it, unless you want a full-scale prehistoric brawl on your hands. So you portion it out, perhaps 1 chunk per person, then another, ensuring everyone gets their share. It's the original food justice program, before anyone even knew what justice was, or programs for that matter. But it wasn't just about filling your belly. Safety was paramount, and numbers played a critical role. You're huddled around a fire, the flickering light casting long, dancing shadows. How many are in your hunting party? And across the ridge, the smoke from another tribe's fire curls lazily into the sky. How many of them do you estimate there are? Enough to pose a threat, or just a few stragglers you can safely ignore? Knowing your own strength in numbers and estimating that of potential adversaries was a matter of life and death. Or maybe you're facing a different kind of threat, predators. You hear the howls in the distance, closer this time. Are there 1, 2, a whole pack of dire wolves? Each additional set of glowing eyes in the darkness exponentially increases your danger. And beyond the immediate threats, there were cycles. The moon waxes and wanes. The seasons shift. How many sleeps until the next full moon, ideal for a night hunt? How many cold sunrises until the bitter grip of winter truly sets in, when game becomes scarce and shelter becomes critical? This, my friend, is where primitive statistics truly begins to shine. It's the first spreadsheet, etched into the very air you breathe, a calculation of survival. Beyond the immediate concerns of food and safety, early counting extended to the very infrastructure of nascent human existence, basic resource management. You're chipping away at flint, shaping it into a formidable spearhead. But how many spears do you have in total for the next hunt? How many sharp flint shards are left for processing hides, for cutting sinew? Running out in the middle of a vital task could be disastrous. You trek miles to a water source, a trickling stream or a natural spring. How many days' worth of water do you have stored in those rudimentary gourds or animal bladders? You're constantly assessing, reevaluating. Then there's shelter. You're building a lean-to against the biting wind. How many sturdy logs do you need for the frame? How many large leaves or animal skins to create a waterproof roof? This wasn't abstract arithmetic. It was hands-on, tangible inventory management. Perhaps one of the earliest and most direct pieces of evidence for counting is the Ishango bone, a dark brown fibula of a baboon discovered in the Congo. It's around 20,000 years old, intricately carved with a series of tally marks grouped in distinct patterns. While some argue it's a simple tally stick for counting game or days, others propose it's a lunar calendar or even a primitive prime number table. It's like the first known to-do list, just on a bone. On the quirkier side, some indigenous cultures, even into more recent times, developed fascinating body part counting systems. Instead of just fingers and toes, they'd use knuckles, elbows, shoulders, even eyes and ears, effectively expanding their numerical base far beyond the standard 10 or 20. Imagine trying to explain your grocery list to someone using your clavicle and your left earlobe as part of the count. It certainly puts a new spin on lend me an ear. Historians still argue whether the initial impetus for these early counting methods was purely pragmatic, survival, as we've discussed, or if there was a deeper, perhaps ritualistic or astronomical purpose that drove humans to quantify their world. Regardless, the need to track, to manage, to understand quantities was already firmly embedded in the human psyche. It was the genesis of a fundamental skill that would, quite literally, shape every single aspect of human civilization to follow. And it was just the beginning of our obsession with numbers. You're deep within the echoing maw of a cave, where the air hangs heavy and cool, tasting of damp earth and the faint, acrid tang of an old fire. Your hand, calloused and strong, closes around a piece of worked antler, smooth in places, rough in others, a history etched into its very being. The only light flickering in this primeval silence comes from a small, sputtering flame in a hollowed-out stone lamp, casting dancing shadows that twist and stretch like ancient spirits. Outside, the wind howls a lullaby. A distant rumble suggests something large is moving through the undergrowth, and you can almost hear the soft scurry of unseen creatures. Survival here, you realize, is a moment-by-moment calculation, a constant tally of threats versus resources. This isn't your cozy bedroom. This is a world where forgetting a single detail, like how many days until the migratory herd passes, or exactly how much dried meat you managed to cure, could very well mean you probably won't survive this. Without a system, a way to externalize those crucial numbers, you're just another snack on the prehistoric menu. So you hold that antler, or perhaps it's a piece of bone, smoothed by countless touches, and you feel the urge, the pressing necessity to make a mark. Not just any mark, but a deliberate cut, a notch. It's a silent, primal declaration. This matters. I need to remember this. Imagine the frustration of trying to keep track of a growing family, a dwindling food supply, or the precise phases of the moon, purely in your head. It's like trying to count sheep when half of them are invisible in a blizzard and the other half are wolves. You need something tangible, something you can touch, see, and revisit. Bones and antlers, being readily available and remarkably durable, became the perfect canvases for these earliest attempts at externalized memory. They were, in essence, the very first permanent ledgers. You could carry them with you, pass them down, or bury them for future generations to puzzle over, wondering if your intricate system was a complex astronomical calendar, or just how many times you'd stubbed your toe that week. Among the most famous of these ancient counting tools is the Ishango bone, discovered in the Congo, dating back around 20,000 BC. Picture it, a baboon fibula, no bigger than your hand, intricately carved with a series of distinct notches grouped into various patterns. It's not just a random scattering of cuts. These are deliberate, organized arrays. Mainstream interpretation suggests that these groupings represent a sophisticated understanding of tallying, perhaps even lunar cycles, used for tracking seasons, hunting quotas, or the menstrual cycles of the women in a tribe. Think about that. A piece of bone found thousands of miles away from your modern sofa, potentially holding the key to understanding how our ancestors managed their lives. From predicting the salmon run to knowing when to expect the next generation. It's a testament to the human mind's innate need to quantify the world. Another, even older contender is the Lebombo bone, a notched baboon fibula found in a cave in Eswatini, formerly Swaziland, carbon dated to approximately 35,000 BC. While simpler than Ishango, its 29 distinct notches are often interpreted as a primitive lunar calendar, or at least a record of a 29-day cycle. It speaks to a profound observational capacity and the very first stirrings of mathematical thought, long before anyone had even conceptualized numbers as abstract entities. Now, while the mainstream view leans towards these bones being early counting devices or calendars, there's always a quirky, fringe theory bubbling just beneath the surface. Some scholars propose that many of these notches aren't counting marks at all. Imagine a prehistoric artisan meticulously sharpening a bone tool, and in the process, leaving behind a series of accidental, yet organized, nicks. Or perhaps these marks were purely decorative, a form of early abstract art, tribal symbols, or even a mnemonic device for storytelling, where each notch represented a specific character or event in a lengthy oral tradition. Perhaps it was a record of shared dreams, or the number of times you successfully avoided being eaten by a saber-toothed cat that month. Who's to say, really? It's far more engaging to think of them as our first proto-spreadsheets, but the possibility that some were just ancient doodling can't be entirely dismissed. And you thought your tax returns were complicated. Try deciphering the financial records of a Stone-Age tribe from a few scratches on a leg bone. Here's where the academic fisticuffs begin. Historians still argue whether these intricate markings on bones truly represent complex mathematical understanding, hinting at an early grasp of prime numbers or base systems, or if they were simply sophisticated tally sticks, a one-to-one correspondence of one mark equals one thing. Was it true abstract counting, or merely a very organized way of keeping track of individual items? The Ishango bone, in particular, with its seemingly non-random groupings, some columns appearing to feature prime numbers or arithmetic progressions, fuels this debate. Did our ancestors stumble upon mathematical principles, or were they just remarkably good at tracking things in neat rows? The truth, as always, is probably somewhere in the muddy middle. What these bone tallies unequivocally represent, however, is a monumental leap. Remember how you needed to know exactly how many days until the migration season, or how much dried meat you had left, and how tricky it was to keep all that in your head. These notched bones offered a solution. They allowed for the externalization of information, freeing up precious mental space from rote memorization. Good luck remembering how many mammoths you spotted on Tuesday when you're also trying to recall the recipe for fermented berries and the escape route from a territorial cave bear. These bones were the world's first external hard drives, making memory tangible and shareable. It was no longer just your count. It was the count, available for anyone to see and understand, provided they knew the system. This externalization didn't just aid individual memory. It laid the groundwork for collective knowledge, for planning larger hunts, for understanding cyclical events, and for passing on vital information across generations. It transformed fleeting thoughts into enduring records, a silent testament to the dawning of numerical literacy in the human story. The need to remember, to track, to manage resources, pushed us beyond relying solely on our brains and onto scratching our very first numbers into the world around us. And it was just the beginning. You feel the cool, damp earth beneath your calloused feet, the scent of damp leaves and distant wood smoke filling your nostrils. Dawn breaks, painting the savanna in hues of orange and soft gray, and your eyes, sharpened by necessity, are already scanning the horizon. You're not looking for a lost phone or the nearest coffee shop. You're looking for life, for sustenance, for the very survival of your small band. Ahead, the tracks of a gazelle, fresh and deep, tell a story. How many hoof prints? How many could this herd feed? How many people are with you right now, ready to move, to hunt, to defend? Because if you miscount, if you underestimate the strength of a rival group or overestimate your dwindling supplies, your odds of becoming a permanent part of the food chain increase dramatically. You probably won't survive this oversight. This is your daily reality, a stark contract signed in sweat and instinct, where every rustle in the tall grass could be a meal or a predator. And in this unforgiving world, numbers, even unwritten, unseen numbers, are your allies, whispered truths in the wind. You see, long before the first scratch on a bone, remember those bone tallies from yesterday, those enigmatic marks that hinted at early quantification. Your ancestors, the hunter-gatherers, already possessed an innate, profound understanding of quantity. It wasn't about abstract algebra. It was about the immediate, visceral demands of survival. Knowing the size of your tribe, for instance, wasn't just a pleasant social fact for a census. It was a matter of life and death. How many spears can you effectively deploy against that woolly mammoth? How many mouths need feeding tonight? And how many roots and sweet berries did you gather during the harsh afternoon sun? You can't just say a bunch and hope for the best. A bunch won't tell you if everyone eats, or if little will go to sleep with a rumbling, empty stomach. Imagine the tribal elder, their gaze sweeping over the sleeping forms around the communal fire, the embers still glowing faintly like tiny red eyes. They're not pulling out a clipboard for a roll call, no present, shouted into the pre-dawn chill. Instead, a quick, almost unconscious mental tally is happening, a silent accounting of faces and breaths. 1, 2, 3, wait, where's Grog? Did he wander off again into the darkness, chasing a firefly? Keeping track of the group meant knowing your collective strength, understanding the precise division of labor for the day's foraging, or planning the strategic placement of your hunters, ensuring no one was left vulnerable. It's like trying to get everyone organized for a family road trip. But instead of worrying about Aunt Mildred forgetting her reading glasses, you're worried about half your group being eaten by saber-toothed tigers. A very different, urgent logistical challenge. This rudimentary counting wasn't limited to just people. You're scanning the landscape, perhaps for a stand of wild grains, their heads heavy with promises of sustenance. How many days until they're ripe enough to harvest without ruining the yield? How many baskets, woven painstakingly from pliable reeds, can your foraging party hope to fill before the sun begins its descent? How many treacherous streams must you cross, their cold waters, to reach that prime hunting ground your grandfather spoke of, a place teeming with game. The very rhythm of hunter-gatherer life, inextricably linked to the unpredictable cycles of nature, demanded a nuanced understanding of temporal and spatial quantities. They might not have had a calendar app on their rudimentary stone tablets, but they knew, with an uncanny, ingrained precision, the flow of seasons, the migration patterns of the great herds, and the optimal ripening times of wild fruits. Mainstream historical fact. Early human societies, even without formal numerical systems, developed sophisticated mental tallies and gestural counts for practical needs, often far more complex than simple one-to-one correspondence, reflecting an intuitive grasp of quantity. And sometimes their counting methods well, let's just say they got wonderfully inventive. While we're familiar with using fingers and toes, which is standard, some cultures, particularly in parts of Oceania and among certain indigenous groups in the Americas, developed remarkably intricate body part counting systems. Quirky tidbit. Instead of just 10 fingers or 10 toes, they might use points like the wrist, elbow, shoulder, sternum, nose, ear, or even the eye and the opposite ear, extending their numerical range far beyond what simple digital counting could achieve. Imagine trying to explain your grocery list by pointing to your knee for 3 bundles of reeds, and then tapping your left earlobe for 7 fish. No, not the right ear. That's 9 fish. We only need 7. It might make returning items at the prehistoric general store a bit of a nightmare. You'd need a body map just to count your blessings. This deep integration of counting into their very existence wasn't a sudden invention, a eureka moment, but a gradual, organic development, much like the slow erosion of a riverbed shaping the landscape. Open scholarly debate. Historians still argue whether the development of specific numerical terms, the actual words for 1, 2, many, preceded or strictly followed the practical need for counting larger groups and resources, or if they co-evolved simultaneously, each pushing the other forward in a fascinating dance of necessity and cognition. Was it the necessity of knowing how many people were in the next hunting party that gave birth to the word for 3? Or did the concept of 3 make it easier to articulate the need for a specific quantity of spears or hunters? It's a bit of a chicken or egg scenario, but instead of worrying about omelets, you're dealing with the first, foundational whispers of mathematical thought echoing across ancient landscapes. You're tracking a herd of bison, the thunder of their hooves a primal drumbeat in your chest. Your mind isn't consciously performing complex calculations, but an intuitive assessment is constant. Are there enough here to feed us for a week? Will we have a surplus to trade with the river folk? Will we need to move on sooner than planned if this herd turns south? The success of a hunt wasn't just about bagging the biggest beast. It was about ensuring the survival of the many, of every single person in your tribe. No one was getting a receipt for a successful hunt. No, thank you for your business, note from the grateful tribe. Just the shared warmth of the fire, the contented sighs of full bellies, and the quiet knowledge that you had provided. This communal focus meant that individual tallies, however basic, contributed to a collective well-being, where a single miscount could literally mean communal starvation or the loss of a valuable resource. You learned quickly that close enough only worked for skipping stones across a pond or throwing rocks at particularly brazen squirrels, not for managing your tribe's entire food supply. Your life, your tribe's life, depended on an instinctual, precise understanding of what enough truly meant. It was the first, most vital step on a journey that would eventually lead to spreadsheets and supercomputers. But for now, it was simply the difference between thriving and vanishing. For agriculture demands more complex counting. Settled life necessitated tracking harvests, livestock, and land. You feel the coarse earth crumble between your fingers, the scent of turned soil mingling with the sweat beading on your brow. Your back aches from hours spent bending over, planting tiny seeds with a hope that feels as fragile as the sprouts themselves. This isn't the thrilling chase of the hunter, nor the quiet wisdom of gathering. This is a gamble with the very ground beneath your feet. You're trading instant gratification for a promise, a future harvest that feels both impossibly distant and terrifyingly essential. You've put all your eggs in one basket, or rather, all your grains in one field, and let me tell you, if the rains don't come, or if the blight strikes, or if the locusts descend like a biblical nightmare, you probably won't survive this. No going back to the wild berries and opportunistic antelope when your entire community depends on that barley patch. This new way of life, this tethering to the land, it changed everything. Suddenly, you weren't just tracking how many mastodons your tribe brought down or how many days till the migrating herds passed by. Now, you needed to know how many bushels of wheat you harvested, how many sheep were in the flock, how much land you'd cleared, and how much seed you needed for next year. You're counting, remember that simple tally of 5 fingers or a notch on a bone from the earlier days now had to grow up. It had to become agricultural. It had to become more complex. Think about it. When you were chasing mammoths, counting was mostly about presence or absence. 1 mammoth, 2 mammoth, 0 mammoth run. But now, you're looking at a field of swaying grain. And the question isn't, is there grain? But how much grain? And how much grain do we need to last until the next harvest? And how much do we need to store for the lean season? And how much can we trade with the folks downriver who have too many obsidian tools? It's not just counting discrete units anymore. It's about quantities, yields, projections, and distribution. The shift from nomadic hunter-gatherer societies to settled agricultural communities, often referred to as the Neolithic Revolution, profoundly impacted the development of numerical systems. This wasn't a sudden light bulb moment. It was a gradual evolution spanning thousands of years, beginning roughly around 10,000 BCE in various parts of the world, like the Fertile Crescent. As you stopped chasing your dinner and started growing it, your needs for organization skyrocketed. You started building more permanent dwellings, creating granaries, and even, yes, establishing basic forms of property rights. And with property comes the absolute, undeniable need to count what you own, what you produce, and what you owe. Consider the early ways they tried to keep track. While the iconic clay tokens become famous a bit later, imagine trying to count sacks of grain without a standard measure. Perhaps you'd use a large stone, meticulously marking a notch on it for every 10 sacks. Or perhaps you'd stack small pebbles, each representing a larger unit. Some theories suggest that early counting systems were deeply intertwined with the human body itself. Not just fingers and toes, but also points on the arm, shoulders, or even the chest, creating wonderfully intricate body counting systems in some indigenous cultures. It's a beautifully human way of making sense of numbers, isn't it? Almost like a personalized calculator, built right in. Historians still argue whether the invention of complex counting systems directly spurred the development of agriculture, or if the demands of agriculture necessitated the innovation of more sophisticated numerical methods. Was it the chicken or the egg? Did we learn to count better because we had more to count, or did counting better enable us to manage more? Perhaps it was a symbiotic dance, each pushing the other forward in a dizzying spiral of progress. You're not just counting grain. You're counting the days until the next flood, the number of hands needed to clear that new patch of land, the ratio of good seeds to bad. You're becoming an ancient statistician, except your spreadsheets are made of sun-baked clay and your undue button is just starvation. No pressure. Imagine the first time you tried to divide a harvest amongst 20 families. Okay, you get this much. You get that much. Wait, did I give you enough? And what about Uncle Thistle? He's got 3 more mouths to feed than Auntie Fern. It's a logistical nightmare that makes your current grocery list look like a haiku. The casual 1, 2, 3 just doesn't cut it when you're dealing with the survival of your entire clan. You need something more robust, something that can handle surplus, deficit, and the occasional grumpy neighbor who thinks their share is too small. This is where the concept of standardization begins to creep in. Before, if you said a handful, everyone knew what you meant, roughly. But when you're talking about feeding an entire village through winter, roughly just doesn't cut it. You start needing a basketful. That means the same thing to everyone, everywhere, every time. You're essentially creating the first ever standardized measurement unit, long before anyone ever dreamed of a metric system. No more handfuls of grain. That vary wildly depending on whether you're dealing with someone with hands like dinner plates or tiny little fingers like a squirrel. This need for consistency, for reliable measurement, it pushes the boundaries of your mental abacus. And then there's the livestock. You've managed to domesticate a few wild goats, a small herd of sheep. They provide milk, wool, and occasionally a very loud alarm clock. But how many are there? Are they healthy? How many new births? How many have wandered off into the brush? You can't just point and grunt many anymore. You need to keep track of individual animals, perhaps by marking them, perhaps by counting them nightly as they enter their enclosure. This wasn't just about simple enumeration. It was about inventory management, ancient style. It's the original counting your chickens before they hatch scenario, except you're actually counting the actual chickens and hoping they do hatch. The development of numerical systems in this era often involved base systems. While base 10, our decimal system seems natural to us because of our 10 fingers, other bases were also common. Some cultures used base 20, linked to fingers and toes. Others, like the ancient Sumerians, developed a sexagesimal base 60 system, which is why we still have 60 seconds in a minute and 360 degrees in a circle. Imagine trying to do your ancient taxes in base 60. Makes you appreciate your smartphone calculator, doesn't it? It's about understanding cycles, too. The cycle of the moon to predict tides for fishing, the cycle of the seasons for planting and harvesting. You're not just counting discrete objects. You're counting time, anticipating events. You're watching the sun's path, the stars, the blooming of certain flowers, all indicators of when to plant, when to harvest, when to prepare for the lean months. Your very survival now hinges on your ability to predict, to plan, and to quantify these natural rhythms. And with settled life comes boredom. Not exactly, but certainly more opportunities for observation and systematic thought. You're not constantly on the move, so you have time to observe patterns in crop growth, in animal breeding, in the weather. These observations, when coupled with the urgent need to manage resources, provided fertile ground for the development of more sophisticated counting techniques. You're not just surviving anymore. You're trying to thrive, and thriving, it turns out, requires a surprising amount of arithmetic. This period also saw the rudimentary beginnings of record keeping. Imagine trying to remember the yield of 3 different fields over 5 different seasons, all in your head. Impossible. So you start making marks on clay tablets, or perhaps tying knots in ropes, early mnemonic devices that allowed you to externalize your memory, to create a tangible record of your counts. This is a monumental step, a true revolution in how humans interacted with numbers. It's the very first step towards what we now call data management. You're essentially creating your own ancient database, one carefully etched mark at a time. It's slower than clicking save, but infinitely more satisfying, perhaps, when you can hold your harvest records in your hand. And with record keeping comes the potential for error, for disputes, for someone claiming they delivered 10 baskets of grain when your tally only shows 8. This pressure, this need for accuracy and verification, it further refined the counting methods. It pushed for clearer symbols, more standardized units, and systems that could be easily understood and checked by others. Because nothing spoils a harmonious agricultural community faster than a dispute over grain, or a dispute over sheep, or, let's be honest, a dispute over just about anything when everyone's hungry. So as you drift off, imagine yourself as that early farmer, painstakingly counting your seeds, your livestock, your days until harvest. Feel the weight of that responsibility, the sheer necessity of getting those numbers right. Because in this new, settled world, counting wasn't just a convenience. It was the very backbone of your existence. It was the difference between a bountiful harvest and a hungry winter. And you, my friend, were becoming an accidental accountant, centuries before anyone even knew what a ledger was. You feel the dry, dusty air of Mesopotamia cling to your skin, a far cry from the verdant, wild landscapes your hunter-gatherer ancestors roamed. Here, life isn't just about the immediate hunt or the seasonal berry pick. No, you are a settled citizen, perhaps a farmer, perhaps a merchant, perhaps even a scribe in training, living within the protective walls of Uruk or Lagash. These burgeoning city-states rising like mud-brick monuments from the Fertile Crescent. Your days are dictated by the rhythm of the Euphrates and Tigris, by the meticulous planning required to feed thousands, not just your tribe of 30. Remember how agriculture demanded you keep track of your planted fields and your growing flocks. Well, now, that simple tally has exploded into a logistical nightmare. A beautiful, organized chaos that requires something far more sophisticated than notches on a bone or pebbles in a pouch. You walk through the bustling marketplace, the scent of baking bread mingling with the distant, pungent aroma of livestock. Merchants haggle over sacks of barley, bolts of linen, and jars of olive oil. Farmers bring their surplus, artisans their crafts. And as you observe this intricate dance of supply and demand, you realize a fundamental truth. You can't just rely on memory anymore. Not when you've got hundreds of sheep being moved from pasture to temple storehouse. Not when a potter owes the temple 3 dozen pots. Not when a farmer is contracted to deliver amount of grain after the harvest. Your casual one-too-many system. Charming as it was for counting crocodiles you definitely didn't try to wrestle, simply won't cut it. This is where the sheer, glorious drudgery of bureaucracy truly begins. And honestly, if you'd lived back then, you probably wouldn't survive this era of endless record-keeping. Your modern brain, accustomed to digital convenience, would likely short-circuit trying to keep track of every single barley payment by etching marks onto damp clay. This burgeoning complexity, this explosion of trade and administrative need, led to one of humanity's most ingenious, yet remarkably humble inventions, the clay token. Picture them. Tiny, unassuming pieces of baked clay, fashioned into various geometric shapes, cones, spheres, cylinders, discs. Some even depicted miniature representations of what they stood for. A tiny clay sheep, a little jar, a miniature ox head. These weren't just pretty trinkets. They were the very first pieces of physical accounting data, the silent architects of the world's first true administrative systems. Each shape, each size, represented a specific quantity of a specific commodity. A small cone might signify a single measure of grain, a sphere perhaps 10 measures. You're not counting the actual grain, you're counting its representation. It's a bit like playing Monopoly, where your little plastic houses and hotels stand in for actual properties, except here, the stakes were real, and the ancient equivalent of go to jail was probably far less forgiving. Imagine you are a temple administrator, tasked with managing the vast resources that flow into the ziggurat's coffers. Grain, livestock, textiles, it all comes in, and it all needs to be accounted for. When a farmer delivers 5 bushels of barley, you hand him 5 small clay cones. When a shepherd brings in 10 sheep for shearing, you give him 10 clay discs representing sheep. These tokens were more than just receipts. They were physical data points, transferable and tangible. When a transaction was complete, you didn't just write it down. You actually exchanged these tiny, symbolic pieces of the economy. It was a brilliantly tactile system, perfect for a society where literacy was still a specialized, rare skill. You could literally feel the numbers in your hand, a far cry from the abstract digits you manipulate on a screen today. This system, though simple in concept, became incredibly sophisticated. To ensure security and prevent fraud, these tokens weren't just handed over loosely. Oh no, that would be far too easy for an enterprising ancient accountant with sticky fingers. Instead, groups of tokens representing a specific transaction or debt would be placed inside hollow clay spheres called bullae. Think of a bulla as an ancient, unopenable envelope, a sort of proto-safe. Once the tokens were inside, the bulla would be sealed, and often the outside would be impressed with the seals of the involved parties, like a signature, along with marks indicating the number and type of tokens inside. So you'd have a smooth clay ball covered in symbols, and inside, rattling gently, were the actual tokens representing the sheep, the barley, or the pots. It was an early form of tamper-evident packaging, a system that effectively said, "What's inside here? Well, just shake it and guess. Or better yet, look at the symbols on the outside." It made for a very satisfying aha moment when archaeologists eventually cracked them open millennia later. Historians still argue whether the complexity of these token systems ultimately forced the invention of writing itself, or if writing developed independently to meet other needs, and then absorbed the accounting function. Was the pressure to represent the token's content on the outside of the bulla what eventually led to abstract signs on flat tablets? It's a bit like asking if the invention of the email attachment led to the invention of the entire internet, or if the internet was going to happen anyway, and email attachments just found a comfortable home there. Regardless, the need to represent these tokens, and the information they contained, without having to break open the bulla, pushed the boundaries of symbolic representation. You started seeing impressions of the tokens themselves pressed onto the wet clay surface of the bulla, then simplified drawings, and eventually, abstract cuneiform signs. This innovation marked a pivotal shift. No longer were you tied to a one-to-one physical representation for every single item. Now, you could use a few marks on a clay tablet to represent vast quantities, complex transactions, and even legal agreements. The abstract symbol began to replace the concrete object. This was the birth of true financial record-keeping, of the concept of balance sheets, though they certainly didn't call them that. It was the moment accounting ceased being a collection of distinct physical objects and became a series of records, marks on a surface that could be easily stored, compared, and updated. Your sleep-deprived brain might appreciate that. Imagine having to carry around bags of little clay sheep every time you wanted to check your net worth. "Excuse me, Mr. Potter, I'd like to check my assets. Just let me retrieve my 3,000 clay cones from the vault." No, this was far more practical. These early Mesopotamian tokens and the bully they were housed in weren't just about tracking who owed what. They were the bedrock upon which the first complex economies were built. They facilitated large-scale trade, enabled taxation, and allowed for the centralized management of resources by temples and emerging states. Without this tangible, universally understood system of counting and accounting, the grand architectural projects, the vast irrigation networks, and the very fabric of organized urban life in Mesopotamia would have crumbled under their own weight. You can almost hear the soft click of clay tokens settling into a bulla, a sound that, for thousands of years, represented the pulse of an evolving civilization, a quiet testament to humanity's enduring need to count, categorize, and control its world. You feel the baking sun on your skin, the grit of the desert underfoot, and the immense, silent presence of stone looming over you. The air shimmers, not just from the heat, but from the weight of millennia of sheer, unimaginable human effort. You're standing, or perhaps more accurately, shuffling, in ancient Egypt, a land where counting wasn't just a convenience. It was the very breath of civilization, the invisible force that sculpted mountains of rock into monuments to eternity. Remember those little clay tokens from Mesopotamia, tracking a handful of sheep, or perhaps a dozen jars of olive oil? Well, here, things got bigger, much bigger. The very rhythm of Egyptian life, dictated by the annual, life-giving flood of the Nile, demanded an entirely new level of numerical precision. You needed to know exactly when that mighty river would swell its banks, how much land it would fertilize, and, crucially, how much land belonged to whom after the waters receded. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about grand-scale survival, about feeding an entire kingdom, about creating surpluses that could fund the most ambitious construction projects humanity had ever dared to dream of. Your average hunter-gatherer, counting spear points, wouldn't know what hit them. To manage all this, the Egyptians devised a system as elegant as it was practical. Hieroglyphic numbers. Imagine trying to explain calculus with pictures, and you're halfway there. For basic counting, they used simple strokes for 1, a heel bone for 10, a coiled rope for 100, a lotus flower for 1,000, a bent finger for 10,000, a tadpole for 100,000, and the god Heth, crouching in eternal support, for a cool 1,000,000. You could literally see your numbers pile up, from a single man to an entire army, or from one day to a millennium. This wasn't just for fancy tomb inscriptions. This was the workhorse of the scribal class, the very bedrock upon which every granary, every tax assessment, and every single stone of the pyramids was laid. And oh, those stones. Think about it. How do you move millions of colossal blocks, some weighing upwards of 80 tons, from a quarry hundreds of miles away, and then place them with such astonishing precision that they form structures which still baffle engineers today? You count, you measure, you calculate. You ensure every single cut is exact, every angle precise. Forget your modern tape measure. These folks were using ropes and cubits and their own meticulously developed understanding of geometry. If you were a foreman on a pyramid construction site, and your measurements were off by even a few inches, you weren't just going to get a performance review. Let's just say your life expectancy, already a bit dicey with the lack of modern medicine and the occasional sandstorm, would take a serious nosedive if your calculations led to a monumental collapse. You probably wouldn't survive this job without a very good abacus, or at least a highly accurate toe counting system. They probably had early versions of counting sheep just to get to sleep, except their sheep were perfectly aligned astronomical observations. Beyond the brute force of building, counting was critical for the more ethereal, yet equally vital realm of astronomy. The Egyptians meticulously tracked the stars, not just for cosmic pondering, but for practical reasons. To predict the Nile's inundation, to orient their temples and tombs, and to regulate their calendar. Their 365-day calendar, with 12 months of 30 days plus 5 extra epigonal days, was remarkably accurate for its time and utterly dependent on precise astronomical observation. And you guessed it, counting. You had to count the days, the hours, the heliacal rising of Sirius, the brightest star in their sky, which heralded the flood. Their very cosmology was entwined with numerical cycles. The people who did all this heavy numerical lifting were the scribes. They were the rock stars of ancient Egypt, holding immense power and prestige because they could read, write, and most importantly for our story, count. They kept records of everything: grain harvested, taxes due, workers employed, and the exact dimensions of every block of granite destined for a pharaoh's tomb. If your grain silo was even one lotus flower short on inventory, well, let's just say Pharaoh's accountant had ways of making you recount it. The complexity of their administration, from managing vast irrigation networks to organizing massive military campaigns, rested squarely on their ability to handle large numbers and perform complex arithmetic. It's interesting to note their unique approach to fractions. They had a very particular way of writing them, almost exclusively using unit fractions, like 1-2, 1-3, 1-4, often denoted by an open-mouth hieroglyph above the number. The only common non-unit fraction was 2-3, which had its own special symbol. Imagine trying to divvy up your pyramid-building rations using only unit fractions and that tricky 2-3. All right, you get 1/4 of a loaf, and you, my friend, you get 1/7. Don't ask for 3-5, we don't do that here. This focus on unit fractions, while seemingly cumbersome to our modern decimal-heavy minds, allowed them to tackle practical division problems with surprising efficiency. Historians still argue whether the Egyptians possessed a truly theoretical understanding of advanced geometry, or if their astounding architectural precision was achieved primarily through empirical methods and highly skilled craftsmen following precise, handed-down instructions. Was it abstract theorems, or just really good rule of thumb, honed over centuries of building massive structures that still defy explanation? Whichever it was, the ability to count, to measure, and to calculate on a grand, almost unthinkable scale was the indispensable bedrock of their civilization, allowing them to transform the very landscape into a testament to their numerical prowess. They didn't just count the stars, they built monuments to touch them. You stand amidst the clamor of the ancient marketplace, a cacophony of bleating goats, hawkers' cries, and the rhythmic thud of a distant potter at his wheel. Sunlight, filtered through a dusty haze, dances on piles of vibrant textiles and glints off polished copperware. You're clutching a hefty sack of grain, your precious surplus from a season of back-breaking labor. Beside you, a merchant squints at your bounty, his fingers tracing the rim of a clay pot. "This much," he declares, holding up the pot, "for that much cloth." You eye the cloth, a beautiful, tightly woven linen, but a knot of unease tightens in your gut. His pot looks smaller than the one your neighbor got for his grain yesterday. Or was it larger? You scratch your head, the sun beating down on your brow. There's no standard pot. No standard measure for the cloth, either. One merchant stretches the fabric between his outstretched arms, calling it a cubit, while another, with noticeably shorter arms, does the same. How do you know you're not getting fleeced? This, my friend, is where the simple act of counting, which we've been tracking since the first notched bone, blossoms into something far more sophisticated. Something that underpins every single transaction you've ever made, even your morning coffee run. Imagine the chaos. Every village, every tribe, every family group had its own way of measuring. A hand of grain here might be a generous scoop, there a miserly sprinkle. A day's journey could mean anything from a brisk walk to a grueling trek across treacherous terrain. Not exactly helpful when you're planning to meet a trade caravan. And for construction, forget about it. You want to build a grand temple, a monument to your gods, or even just a sturdy house that won't collapse on your head during the next strong wind. You need bricks that are the same size, timbers that are the same length, and foundations that can bear predictable loads. Without standardized measurements, you're basically playing a very slow, very expensive game of Jenga where every piece is a different shape. And let me tell you, you probably won't survive this if your house falls on you. Not even with all the crocodile dung sunscreen in the world. Remember that. It's in this swirling eddy of commercial confusion and architectural aspiration that the need for a common language of quantity became overwhelmingly apparent. People realized that counting, while useful for tracking individual items, wasn't enough when those items had to be consistently valued or dimensioned across different people, places, and times. So, they started to standardize. The Egyptians, those masters of monumental construction, were among the first to grasp this on a truly grand scale. Their solution? The cubit. No, not just any cubit, like the variable arm length you just witnessed in the marketplace. We're talking about the Royal Egyptian cubit. This wasn't just someone's arm. It was a carefully crafted rod, usually made of granite or wood, meticulously divided into smaller units. Palms, digits, and even fractions of digits. This cubit was guarded, literally, in temples and palaces, ensuring that every foreman, every stonemason, every architect was working from the exact same blueprint of measurement. This is our mainstream historical fact. The ancient Egyptians developed and rigorously maintained the royal cubit, a standardized unit of length, around 3000 BCE, crucial for their monumental building projects like the pyramids and temples. Imagine the sheer organizational feat, ensuring every quarry, every workshop, every construction site adhered to this single, unwavering standard. It wasn't just about fairness, it was about functional necessity. You can't build a pyramid that lasts millennia if your base is a foot shorter on one side, because someone's arm was a bit stubbier. This push for standardization wasn't limited to length. Measures of volume and weight followed suit. In Mesopotamia, for instance, they developed standard weights for trade, often made of stone and shaped like ducks or lions. Imagine haggling over a sack of barley, and instead of relying on the merchant's suspiciously light handful, you could place your grain on a scale and balance it against a universally recognized stone duck. "Ah, yes," you'd say, pointing to the duck. "That's exactly one duck of barley. It brought a refreshing, almost revolutionary, transparency to transactions. No more whispered accusations of shortchanging, no more feeling like you're being led down the garden path by someone's suspiciously small pot of oil. Well, maybe a little less. Some merchants are just naturally suspicious, even with standardized weights. I mean, who weighs things in ducks? That's our quirky tidbit. Ancient Mesopotamians used stone weights often shaped like animals, including ducks and lions, to standardize measurements for trade, adding a surprisingly charming aesthetic to their bureaucracy. The transition, however, wasn't always smooth. Historians still argue whether the primary driver for standardization was purely economic, fairer trade, less disputes, or if it was also a tool of control, allowing central authorities to more effectively tax goods, manage resources, and oversee large-scale state projects. Was it a benevolent move for the common good, or just another way for the powerful to consolidate their power and extract more from the populace? It's a classic chicken and egg situation, isn't it? Did the demand for fairer trade push governments to standardize? Or did governments realize standardization was a great way to manage their empires and then enforce it? My bet. A bit of both, because human nature, then as now, is rarely simple. Consider the ripple effect of this standardization. Once you have consistent units of measure, you can start to do more complex calculations. You can accurately estimate the amount of stone needed for a temple, the amount of grain required to feed a city for a season, or the yield from a specific plot of land. This allowed for better planning, more efficient resource allocation, and ultimately, larger and more stable societies. You could trust that the timber you ordered from a distant forest would actually fit the roof you were building. Rather than ending up with a collection of random-length sticks you'd have to puzzle together like some ancient, high-stakes game of pick-up sticks. Imagine the size of relief from the poor carpenter, finally able to buy a standard plank without wondering if the seller's foot was actually just their big toe. This move towards universal units fundamentally changed commerce. Trade routes expanded, becoming more reliable, because merchants from different regions could finally speak the same quantitative language. You could send your goods hundreds of miles, confident that the buyer would receive the agreed-upon quantity, measured by a standard that both parties understood and respected. It laid the groundwork for complex economic systems, for banks, for international trade, and eventually, for the globalized world we inhabit today. Without it, you'd still be haggling over suspiciously small pots and wondering if your grain was worth the cloth. You might even find yourself bartering your favorite sheep for a single, suspiciously undersized, clay duck. And honestly, who needs that kind of stress before bed? You're not trudging through the Fertile Crescent anymore, counting sheep or measuring grain. The dust of Mesopotamia and the meticulous order of Egyptian construction are fading from your mental rear view. Instead, a different breeze stirs the air around you now, carrying the scent of olives and the distant murmur of philosophical debate. You stand, perhaps, on a sun-drenched marble portico, the distant Aegean glinting like scattered jewels, or maybe you're perched on a stone bench in a shaded grove, listening intently to the hushed voices of men with serious brows. This isn't about tallying harvests or tracking the number of bricks for a pyramid. This is about thinking. And let me tell you, without Google and a calculator, you'd probably fail miserably at even the most basic Greek geometry problem. Surviving academically in ancient Athens? Highly unlikely for most of us if we're honest. This is where counting takes a profound, almost spiritual leap. For centuries, numbers had been tools sharp, efficient instruments for managing the very tangible world around you. They helped you know if you had enough food for winter, if your flock was dwindling, or if that trade deal was genuinely fair. But here, in the land of philosophers and thinkers, numbers shed their earthy shackles. They become ideas, pure, unadulterated concepts, floating in the ethereal realm of thought, untethered from the mundane counting of things. Imagine yourself, for a moment, in the secretive halls of the Pythagorean school. Yes, that Pythagoras, the one whose theorem you probably sweated over in high school. But for him and his followers, mathematics wasn't just about triangles. Oh no, it was a religion. They believed that all is number. Not just that numbers describe the universe, but that numbers are the universe. Harmony, music, the movement of the planets, everything, absolutely everything, could be expressed through numerical ratios. You listen intently as one of the initiates explains how the perfect musical intervals correspond to simple whole number ratios. 2, 1 for an octave, 3, 2 for a perfect fifth. It's almost hypnotizing, this belief that the cosmos hums with mathematical precision. You find yourself wondering if they ever just counted their drachmas. Probably not in public. That would be far too practical. Then comes the bombshell, the intellectual earthquake that rattled the very foundations of their ordered numerical universe. Irrational numbers. Imagine discovering a number, like the square root of 2, that simply cannot be expressed as a neat, tidy fraction. It's like finding a flaw in the perfect tapestry of existence. For the Pythagoreans, who believed in the absolute harmony and commensurability of all things, this was deeply disturbing. The story, perhaps apocryphal, goes that Hippasus of Metapontum, one of Pythagoras's disciples, dared to reveal this secret, and for his trouble was either drowned at sea or cast out into exile. It's a stark reminder that sometimes, simply asking, "How many?" leads to questions you weren't prepared to answer, shattering your neatly ordered world. Just like when you accidentally calculate how many hours you've spent binge-watching that one show. You wish you hadn't counted. You move on, perhaps, to the academy where Plato holds court. For Plato, numbers aren't just concepts. They are perfect, eternal forms existing in a realm beyond our senses. The triangle you draw in the sand is merely an imperfect shadow of the true, ideal triangle that exists in the world of forms. When you count 3, you're not just counting 3 apples. You're dimly perceiving the form of threeness itself. It's a bit like saying that when you see a particularly fluffy cloud, you're catching a glimpse of the perfect, ultimate fluffiness. This philosophical leap meant that mathematics wasn't just a useful tool. It was a pathway to understanding ultimate reality. It was a way to glimpse perfection, something far grander than knowing how many sheep you own. Think about it. This is the birthplace of geometry as a rigorous, deductive science. Euclid, a generation or two later, would systemize this, laying down his axioms and postulates, building a logical edifice where every step follows undeniably from the last. You trace a line in the dust with your finger, then another, intersecting. You contemplate the angle, not as something to be measured for a construction project, but as an abstract concept, a relationship between two lines. This shift from practical measurement to abstract intellectual pursuit is monumental. It's the difference between using a recipe to bake a cake and devising the fundamental principles of thermodynamics that explain how a cake bakes. One is delicious, the other, arguably more profound. And then there's Aristotle, a student of Plato, but one who brought numbers back down to earth a little. He respected mathematics, of course, but he focused more on empirical observation and the classification of things in the physical world. He was less about numbers as ideal forms and more about numbers as properties of objects. He's the guy who'd probably ask, but what is a triangle, really, if not three lines connected? While Plato was musing on the essence of triangularity, historians still argue whether Aristotle truly understood the profound implications of irrational numbers, or if he simply sidestepped the philosophical dilemma they posed for the Pythagorean worldview. It's a bit like debating whether your cat truly understands quantum physics, or if it just enjoys batting at the laser pointer dot. The Greeks, then, were the ones who truly liberated numbers. They unchained them from the physical world, allowing them to soar into the realm of pure thought. They turned counting from a necessary chore into a profound intellectual adventure, setting the stage for centuries of scientific and philosophical inquiry. This abstract way of thinking about quantities, shapes, and relationships, this pondering of numbers beyond just things, is why you can now build bridges, design microchips, and predict the orbit of distant planets. You can thank them for that, and for the occasional headache when trying to figure out your tax return. Some numbers just refuse to be abstract enough. 9 Roman numerals, Empire's practical ledger. Discover how the empire managed vast systems with their numerals. You stand amidst the ceaseless thrum of Rome, the very heart of an empire that stretches further than your wildest dreams. The air, thick with the scent of olive oil, stale wine, and a faint hint of human ambition, presses in around you. Sunlight glints off polished marble, illuminates the dust motes dancing in the beams that pierce through a grand archway. Legionaries, their sandals slapping a rhythmic cadence on the cobblestones, march past with an almost unsettling precision, their armor gleaming. Merchants shout their wares in a cacophony of languages, each vying for attention, their hands gesturing wildly as they haggle over amphorae of grain, bolts of dyed cloth, or slaves with downcast eyes. Everywhere you look, numbers are etched into the very fabric of this colossal machine. Not the neat, angular digits you're familiar with, but a more ancient, blocky script. You see a legionary's standard, adorned with a proud X indicating his 10th legion. A baker's stall displays his loaves, a chalked VIII denoting 8 pieces. On the side of a bustling basilica, where legal disputes unfold like street theater, a stone tablet announces the year as MMCCLXXVAUC. A sprawling sequence of letters that, with a bit of mental gymnastics, tells you how many years have passed since the city's founding. You're trying to calculate how many times you've dodged a runaway chariot today, and already your brain feels like it's doing intellectual acrobatics. Honestly, trying to divide MCLXIV by LII in your head, you probably won't survive this numerical onslaught. This is the world of Roman numerals, a system born not from the abstract philosophical musings of Greek mathematicians we touched upon earlier, but from the brutal, beautiful, utterly pragmatic needs of empire building. Remember those crude notches on bones, or the Mesopotamian clay tokens for tracking sheep? Well, Rome took that fundamental human urge to quantify and supersized it, stretching it across an entire continent. Their system, simple yet robust for its primary purposes, was a testament to their engineering mindset. Functional, durable, and surprisingly scalable for certain tasks. Consider the bedrock of their power, the legions. To move an army of 50,000 men, with their countless supply carts, their fodder, their weapons, across a sprawling network of meticulously constructed roads, you need to count. You need to know how many amphorae of water will sustain them for days. You need to track the XX cohort, making sure they arrive at the Seath milestone on time. Each mile marker on those legendary Roman roads was meticulously numbered, not with Arabic numerals, but with prominent, unmissable Roman ones, guiding legions and merchants alike across vast distances. This wasn't just about counting, it was about the logistics of domination. And then there's the bureaucracy. Oh, the bureaucracy. While it might not have been as convoluted as some modern systems, no endless forms with section 3b subsection IV here. The Romans were masters of the ledger. Every sestertius collected in taxes, every bushel of grain requisitioned from a newly conquered province, every public work project, from a grand aqueduct stretching for XL miles to a new temple requiring blocks of marble, had to be meticulously recorded. Imagine trying to do your monthly budget using only I's and V's. Darling, we spent MCCCXLVII sesterces on chariot repairs this month, and only LXXXIX on lentils. We need to adjust. It might make you yearn for the simplicity of those early Egyptian tally marks. The symbols themselves, I, V, X, L, C, D, M, are thought to have evolved from a variety of sources. The I is clearly a single stroke, perhaps representing a finger. The V for 5 might have been an open hand, thumb outstretched, or even a notched stick. The X for 10, 2 V's joined at their points, or perhaps 2 crossed sticks. Mainstream historical fact. The Roman Empire, at its peak, managed to build and maintain over 400,000 kilometers, 250,000 miles of roads. An engineering marvel that relied heavily on their counting system for mapping, construction, and logistical planning. Imagine the surveying teams, meticulously marking out each stadium with painted X's and V's on rocks, miles from any city, under a blistering sun, probably complaining about the lack of shade, and hoping for a decent Roman bath at the next outpost. Now for a quirky tidbit. While we mostly know Roman numerals for their standard form, like IV for 4, or IX for 9, this subtractive notation wasn't always universally applied, especially in earlier periods or in informal contexts. Sometimes you'd see III instead of IV on clock faces, or VIII instead of IX for 9. It's like discovering that your great-great-grandparents had a completely different way of spelling their own names. It wasn't until much later, perhaps during the medieval period, that the subtractive rule became truly standardized. This little inconsistency highlights that even in a seemingly rigid system, human habit and practicality often played a larger role than theoretical perfection. Historians still argue whether the origins of L for 50, C for 100, D for 500, and M for 1,000 were purely arbitrary, derived from older Etruscan symbols, or if they had a more logical, perhaps phonetic, connection to Latin words. Was C simply the first letter of centum, 100? Or did the symbol come first and centum later? The exact lineage of these higher value symbols remains a delightful puzzle for academics to gnaw on during long, candlelit nights in dusty libraries. Despite their apparent clumsiness for complex arithmetic, try multiplying CLXVII by DCCCXXXIX without a dedicated abacus or a very patient scribe Roman numerals were incredibly effective for what the Romans needed them for: counting, recording, and identifying. They were excellent for simple addition and subtraction, perfect for tallying goods in a market, numbering legionary units, marking milestones, or indicating dates on public buildings. When you needed to know if you had C bags of grain or CC bags, the system worked beautifully. When you needed to divide those bags equally among X cohorts and predict how much waste you'd have over L days, well, that's when things got a bit more cumbersome. Their enduring legacy, however, is clear. They ruled the Western world for over a millennium, and their counting system, a testament to their practicality over pure mathematical elegance, persisted long after the empire itself crumbled. You still see them today, carved into cornerstones of ancient buildings on the faces of clocks, marking the release dates of movies. Think MCMLXXXV on an old VHS tape, and even in the names of popes and monarchs. It's a reminder that sometimes the simplest tool, consistently applied with unwavering purpose, can conquer more than any complex algorithm. It's almost as if they said, why make it complicated when you can just add up a bunch of sticks and hands? And for 1,000 years it worked. And yet, despite all this numerical prowess, this grand organizational feat, the air here still feels heavy with the echoes of lives lived precariously. The vastness of the empire might be impressive, but the realities of daily existence for the average citizen, amidst the crowds and the constant threat of plague or famine, remind you that even with meticulous ledgers, life remained a gamble. The numbers could track the movement of armies and the flow of gold, but they couldn't truly quantify the human cost of empire. You might be counting your blessings that you aren't about to be trampled by a runaway ox cart laden with amphory. Always something to count, isn't there? You wake up in the dead of night, the air thick with silence, and you reach out for your glass of water. It's not there. The space where it should be is just empty. A void. Now imagine a world where that absence, that sheer nothingness, wasn't a concept you could easily quantify, wasn't a fundamental building block of your understanding. Sounds a bit empty, doesn't it? Remember those grand Roman numerals, those sturdy, practical symbols the empire used to track legions and measure aqueducts. X for 10, L for 50, M for 1,000. They were efficient in their way for adding and subtracting things you could see and touch. But try to represent nothing with them. Try to show that you have exactly 0 chickens, or that your legion suffered 0 casualties today. You can't. There's no symbol, no concept for the sheer, magnificent void. It's like trying to bake a cake without the no eggs ingredient. You just don't add eggs, but the recipe doesn't explicitly say 0 eggs. It's an absence, not a presence, and that's where the Romans, for all their engineering prowess, hit a conceptual wall. Imagine, if you will, the sheer intellectual audacity required to invent nothing. To not just acknowledge an absence, but to elevate it to the status of a number. To give it a name, a symbol, a place on the numerical line. It's a bit like giving a standing ovation to an empty stage, profound, yet utterly counterintuitive at first glance. And yet, this is precisely what happened, marking one of the most profound leaps in human thought, a transformation that would ripple through every aspect of counting and computation forever. While many cultures had some notion of a placeholder, the Babylonians, for instance, used a double wedge to denote an empty position, like leaving a gap in a number so you knew if it was 2 or 20. It was in ancient India, nestled in the vibrant crucible of philosophical and mathematical inquiry, that 0 truly found its voice. We're talking about a concept that emerged not just as a placeholder, but as a fully fledged number, a quantity in itself, the true beginning of our modern numerical system. Think of it as the ultimate minimalist design, where the absence of a thing is, in itself, a thing. It's the Marie Kondo of numbers, sparking joy by tidying up your mathematical house. You see, around the same time, across oceans and continents, The Maya civilization in Mesoamerica independently developed their own symbol for zero. Their vigesimal system, based on 20, used a shell-like glyph to represent completion or a zero count in their incredibly precise calendar. It's a fascinating quirk of history, this parallel invention. It's almost as if the universe, in its grand, cosmic accounting, decided that nothing simply had to be recognized and prompted brilliant minds on opposite sides of the globe to figure it out. But the Indian conception, the shunya, as it was known, meaning void or empty, went beyond mere placeholder. It was a number you could add to, subtract from, multiply by. It behaved like any other number, even if its presence meant the absence of quantity. The pivotal moment, the one that truly solidified zero's place in the mathematical Hall of Fame, often falls on the shoulders of the Indian mathematician Brahmagupta, around 628 CE. His treatise, the Brahmasputa Siddhanta, is considered by many to be the first text to treat zero as a number in its own right, not just a placeholder. He laid out the rules for operations involving zero, how adding zero to a number leaves it unchanged, how multiplying by zero always results in zero, and even tackled the tricky concept of division by zero, which, bless his heart, he got a little wrong, but hey, baby steps to calculus. It was like giving a shy, quiet kid in the back of the class a megaphone and telling them to speak their mind. And suddenly, math changed forever. This seemingly simple innovation, this embrace of nothing, unlocked a level of mathematical sophistication previously unimaginable. Suddenly, complex positional notation systems, like the one we use today, became not just possible but elegant. Imagine trying to do long division or algebra with Roman numerals. Seriously, you probably wouldn't survive your basic algebra class if you had to do it with M's and C's and X's. Your brain would turn to mush trying to carry over imaginary numbers. You'd spend more time carving notches on a bone, remember those, just to keep track of simple sums, than actually doing anything useful with the numbers. And good luck balancing your ancient Babylonian ledger without a clear way to show a zero balance. Your entire grain harvest could vanish into the ether of unquantified emptiness. Zero made accounting precise, astronomy calculations elegant, and laid the groundwork for entire branches of mathematics like calculus, which, trust me, you do not want to tackle without zero. Historians still argue whether the concept of zero truly diffused from India to the West, or if there were separate, lesser-known developments that contributed to its eventual acceptance in Europe. What's undeniable, though, is its journey via Arabic scholars, who embraced and further developed the Indian numeral system, including zero. Al-Khwarizmi, a Persian mathematician in the 9th century, whose name gives us algorithm, was instrumental in popularizing these Hindu-Arabic numerals throughout the Islamic world, from where they eventually made their way to Europe. This wasn't just a numerical update. It was a fundamental shift in how the human mind conceived of quantity, space, and the very fabric of existence. Zero, in essence, became the ultimate team player, the silent partner that makes everything else work. It's the unsung hero of your bank account, especially when it proudly proclaims zero debt. Though, in my case, it usually just says zero interest, which is a very different kind of void. You know, for something that represents nothing, zero sure has done a whole lot for us. It's like the quiet person in the corner of the party who ends up being the genius inventor. Meanwhile, the number one is over there hogging all the attention. This revolutionary void transformed counting from a mere tally of what is to a profound system capable of representing what is not. And in doing so, it opened up a universe of mathematical possibilities that humanity is still exploring today. You're staring at a merchant's ledger, the parchment smelling faintly of dried ink and old spices, trying to calculate a massive trade deal using Roman numerals. Your abacus is clattering, beads flying, and the sheer mental gymnastics required to multiply MCMLXXXVII by CCCLIV is giving you a headache that could fell a woolly mammoth. Every calculation feels like deciphering a secret code, and the numbers sprawl across the parchment like an abstract painting, each symbol a monumental effort to interpret. You long for simplicity, for a system that just makes sense. And let's be honest, if you were actually living through this era, trying to manage a kingdom's finances with Roman numerals, you'd probably spend half your life just adding up taxes and the other half pulling out your hair. You probably wouldn't survive this, not with your modern calculator-addled brain that expects instant results from tapping glass. Remember that revolutionary void, the concept of zero, that allowed us to finally distinguish between 10 chickens and 100 chickens without drawing extra squiggles, to tell the difference between a paltry sum and a massive fortune just by the number of zeros appended. Well, that brilliant emptiness was merely the opening act for an even grander show. Imagine if that void could be integrated into a system where the position of a number gave it its true power, where a 1 wasn't just 1, but could also be 10 or 100 or 1,000 or even a tenth, just by shifting its place relative to that magical, defining zero. This isn't just a fantasy. It's a quiet revolution that began unfolding in ancient India, a place of profound philosophical thought and ingenious practical application. While the Greeks pondered numbers as abstract ideals, and the Romans focused on their ledger-keeping utility, the mathematicians and astronomers of India were tinkering with something far more profound. A positional numeral system, complete with our familiar 10 digits, 0 to 9, and a dedicated symbol for zero. This wasn't some sudden eureka moment, mind you, but a slow, deliberate evolution over centuries, driven by the need for more sophisticated astronomical calculations and the growing complexity of trade. By around the 6th or 7th century CE, what we now call the Hindu-Arabic numeral system had largely solidified in India. The sheer elegance of it is breathtaking. A mere 10 symbols, capable of representing any quantity, no matter how vast, with incredible clarity and conciseness. Think about it. Our entire digital world, from your smartphone to interstellar probes, rests on this very foundation. Without the positional value system, your computer screen would be a chaotic mess of hieroglyphs, and your online shopping cart. Good luck adding that up. Did you know that early Indian texts sometimes used a small dot or circle for zero, often called shunya, which literally means empty or void? It was more than just a placeholder. It was a conceptual breakthrough that allowed for sophisticated calculations previously unimaginable, allowing mathematicians to distinguish between 4 and 40 without any ambiguity. It's like discovering that the empty space in your fridge isn't just wasted potential, but a crucial element that allows you to organize your leftovers for optimal future consumption, and prevent that existential dread when you open it and find nothing. Historians still argue whether the concept of zero and the decimal positional system emerged independently in different parts of India, or if there was a single, primary source that then spread, like a viral meme, but with far more enduring consequences. What's clear is that its practical superiority over existing systems was undeniable. Now, Picture a bustling marketplace in Baghdad, circa the 9th century. The air is thick with the scent of spices and learning. The intellectual curiosity of the Islamic Golden Age is at its peak. Scholars from across the known world are converging, translating, preserving, and expanding upon the knowledge of previous civilizations. And among the treasures they encounter are these Indian numerals. Arab scholars, particularly a brilliant mathematician named Mohammed ibn Musa al-Khwarizmi, whose name, by the way, gives us the word algorithm, and who also inspired algebra, recognized the immense power of this system. Al-Khwarizmi's seminal work, Kitab al-Jabr wa al-Muqabala, not only introduced algebra to the world, but also rigorously explained the Indian decimal system. He was, in essence, the ultimate influencer before social media existed, crafting a persuasive argument that convinced the academic and mercantile worlds of the Middle East that these new numbers were the way forward. His books were the viral content of the era, spreading rapidly through the scholarly networks. The adoption wasn't instantaneous, of course. Change rarely is, especially when it challenges deeply ingrained habits. Imagine trying to convince a seasoned Roman merchant, who'd been using his trusty V's and X's for decades, that these newfangled squiggles from the East were somehow better. "What do you mean 10 is just a 1 and a 0? He might scoff. "Where's the gravitas? The strong, unwavering lines of a conqueror's tally, carved into stone." But the practical advantages were simply too overwhelming to ignore. Calculations that took hours with clumsy Roman numerals could now be done in minutes, sometimes even seconds. Complex astronomical observations, precise architectural designs for magnificent mosques and palaces, sophisticated financial accounting for vast trade networks, all became immeasurably easier. It wasn't just about faster sums. It was about opening up entirely new frontiers of mathematical thought and scientific inquiry. It's like upgrading from riding a donkey through a muddy field to piloting a jet plane across continents. Both get you there, but one offers a slightly more efficient journey, far fewer opportunities for donkey-related shenanigans, and a much better view. The Arabic world, embracing this innovation and refining it, became the crucial bridge that carried this knowledge to Europe, initially through trade routes and later through scholarly works translated from Arabic into Latin. When European merchants and scholars encountered these Arabic numerals, ironically, named after the people who transmitted them rather than their Indian originators, they slowly but surely began to see the light. It was a painstaking process, often met with resistance from scribes and accountants who preferred the old, familiar ways, often for reasons of perceived stability or simply comfort with what they already knew. Some even considered them a pagan innovation. But the march of numerical progress, once started, proved unstoppable. The simplicity and efficiency of the decimal system were undeniable, a silent force eroding the stubbornness of tradition. The world was about to count and calculate like never before, laying the groundwork for everything from calculus to cryptocurrencies, forever changing how we perceive and interact with quantity itself. You can feel the grit of the desert wind stinging your eyes, a fine ochre powder that coats your tongue and clings to the rough wool of your tunic. The sun, a relentless hammer in the vast, unforgiving sky, beats down on the backs of the camels trudging ahead. Their rhythmic, swaying gait is hypnotic, almost a count in itself, each hoofbeat a quiet affirmation of the miles you've already conquered and the perilous ones yet to come. This, my friend, is the Silk Road. And let me tell you, if you were actually here, laden with precious cargo and navigating these ancient, treacherous paths. You probably wouldn't survive the first week without a serious reevaluation of your life choices. You're not just carrying silk and spices, though those are certainly piling up on the humps of your weary beasts. No, what's truly heavy in this caravan, heavier than any bale of exotic fabric, are ideas. Specifically, numbers. Remember how the decimal system, that brilliant invention from India, started its slow, inexorable march westward, propelled by the industrious hands of Arabic scholars and merchants. Well, this right here is its grand highway. Every jingle of a camel's bell, every bartered price in a dusty caravanserai, every meticulously kept ledger. They all become conduits for the decimal system, for the concept of zero, for the very idea that quantities can be expressed not just as a collection of pebbles or notches, but as abstract symbols in a base-10 system that makes calculations so much smoother. It's like upgrading from a flip phone to a smartphone, except the upgrade involves millennia of intellectual development and a surprising amount of camel spit. Imagine you're haggling for a bolt of shimmering Chinese silk in a market in Samarkand. The merchant, with a glint in his eye that suggests he knows exactly how much you want that silk, gestures to a stack of clay tablets, crudely etched with cuneiform-like marks. Then another merchant, perhaps from the Arab lands, pulls out a small, portable abacus, its beads clattering with an almost musical precision as he calculates his price. You perhaps learned the clumsy Roman numerals back home, and suddenly you're presented with a world where numbers bend and flow with a new, alien grace. This isn't just about trade. It's about the silent, relentless war of efficiency, fought not with swords, but with superior ways of counting your gold. This incredible network of trade routes, a tapestry woven from human ambition and geographic necessity, wasn't just for commodities. It was a superhighway for knowledge. As you meet merchants from Sogdiana, scholars from Persia, and even intrepid Buddhist monks from far-off lands, you're not just exchanging goods, you're exchanging mindsets. A Chinese merchant, used to his own sophisticated counting rods, might observe an Indian trader using a system of 9 symbols and a dot for zero. And a flicker of recognition, a spark of understanding, might ignite. Wait, he might think, that's much simpler than carrying around a bag of bamboo sticks. And just like that, an idea, a revolutionary mathematical concept, catches a ride on a camel's back and begins its journey across continents. One mainstream historical fact that underscores this exchange is the sheer longevity and scope of the Silk Road itself. For over 1,500 years, from roughly 200 BCE to the mid-15th century CE, it served as the primary artery connecting the East and West, a testament to humanity's enduring drive to acquire what others possess, and in the process, learn what others know. It wasn't a single road, mind you, but a sprawling, interconnected web of paths, arteries, and veins, stretching from China through Central Asia, Persia, the Middle East, and all the way to the Mediterranean. It's truly mind-boggling to consider the sheer volume of goods, and more importantly, ideas that traversed these ancient highways. Imagine the ancient equivalent of Amazon Prime, but with more sand, less two-day shipping, and a much higher chance of being robbed by bandits. Now for a quirky tidbit. Did you know that along sections of the Silk Road, particularly in Central Asia, merchants sometimes used notched sticks as a form of accounting, similar to those ancient tally bones we talked about way back when? Even with more advanced systems emerging, these simple, tangible records persisted, especially in remote areas or for smaller transactions. It was a bit like using a stone tablet to text your friend. Technically possible, but definitely not the most efficient method. It shows that while new ideas spread, old habits, especially counting habits, die hard. Historians still argue whether the persistent use of these older methods was due to a lack of understanding of the newer systems, or simply a stubborn adherence to what was familiar and trusted. Perhaps it was a mix of both, a kind of cultural inertia that only the most compelling and practical innovations could overcome. You, as a hypothetical trader on this epic journey, are living through a period of immense numerical innovation. You might encounter people who still count in base 60, a remnant of Babylonian influence, or others who rely on finger counting systems that vary wildly from region to region. The very air around you is thick with the friction of different counting methods rubbing against each other, sometimes sparking brilliant new understanding, sometimes just causing confusion. It's a bit like trying to order coffee in 5 different languages at once, and hoping one of them gets you a latte instead of a llama. This constant cultural collision forces people to adapt, to simplify, to find common ground in the language of quantity. The need for clear, unambiguous accounting in high-stakes trade transactions provides a powerful impetus for adopting more universal and efficient systems. When you're dealing with caravans of hundreds of camels laden with thousands of pounds of precious cargo, you need a counting system that doesn't invite errors or disputes. Imagine trying to resolve a tariff disagreement with a Roman official using an abacus, while he's trying to reconcile it with his clunky Roman numerals. It's a recipe for a very long day, or possibly a very short career. The very success of the Silk Road depended on a certain level of numerical interoperability. You couldn't just trade silk for spices. You needed to agree on the value of that silk, the weight of those spices, and the appropriate exchange rate of your diverse currencies. This practical necessity, more than any abstract philosophical debate, was the true engine of numerical diffusion. It wasn't about proving a mathematical theorem. It was about making a profit, about ensuring that your caravan didn't arrive at its destination with half its goods missing due to a miscount. And as more and more merchants from diverse cultures embraced the elegant simplicity of the decimal system, the old ways began to recede, like shadows lengthening as the sun sets over the distant dunes. You find yourself standing amidst the jostle and clamor of a bustling medieval market, the kind where the air itself seems to hum with commerce. The scent of freshly baked bread mingles with pungent spices from distant lands, and the lowing of livestock competes with the shouts of merchants hawking their wares. You watch as a burly merchant, his brow furrowed in concentration, slides small wooden discs along etched lines on a simple wooden board. His fingers, surprisingly nimble for their size, dance across the surface, each clack of bead against wood a tiny echo of the calculations unfolding in his mind. This isn't some ancient, forgotten magic. It's the humble, indispensable abacus, the medieval calculator that helped Europe, bit by laborious bit, pull itself out of numerical illiteracy and into the dizzying, delightful, and sometimes devastating world of serious trade. You see, for all the grandeur of Roman numerals, they were about as useful for complex multiplication and division as trying to scoop water with a sieve. Imagine trying to multiply CXLVII by XCIII using only X's and V's. Your head would spin faster than a monk trying to decipher a particularly long Latin sermon. And while the Silk Road had, as we remembered, carried those wonderful Hindu-Arabic numerals across continents, their full adoption in Europe was still a slow, cautious process. People were, shall we say, set in their ways. This is where the abacus stepped in, a bridge between the cumbersome past and the arithmetic future. It wasn't quite the abacus you might picture today, with colorful beads on vertical rods. Often it was simply a smooth board, perhaps dusted with sand, on which lines were drawn representing powers of 10. You'd use pebbles or calculi, which is where our word calculate comes from. Charming, isn't it? To represent numbers on these lines. Or, as you see the merchant doing now, it could be a wooden frame with grooves and actual counters that slid along them. A counter on the bottom line might be 1, on the next line up 10, then 100, and so on. It was remarkably intuitive for addition and subtraction. For multiplication and division, it became a bit more of a performance, involving a series of additions and subtractions, but still far more practical than trying to manipulate Roman numerals. It was the original drag and drop interface, just without the drag, the drop, or, well, the interface in the modern sense. This was the merchant's best friend, the banker's silent partner, and even the king's tax collector's secret weapon. Before this widespread adoption of the abacus, if you wanted to keep track of, say, how many sheep farmer Giles owed you for that parcel of land, or calculate the interest on a loan for a new mill, you were largely doing it in your head, on your fingers, or making tally marks that looked suspiciously like ancient graffiti. With the abacus, you could suddenly manage larger, more complex sums, track inventories of spices and silks, and reconcile ledgers for trade across the continent. You could even figure out how many bushels of grain were needed to feed your castle guard for a month, without accidentally ordering enough for a small army and a parade of hungry pigeons. Now, while the abacus was a workhorse, it wasn't universally loved, especially once those newfangled Hindu-Arabic numerals started making inroads. There arose, in fact, a fascinating intellectual skirmish between the abacists, those who clung to their tried-and-true counting boards, and the algorists, the daring innovators who embraced written arithmetic. Imagine the heated debates in smoky taverns, the abacists scoffing at the invisible nature of numbers written on parchment, while the algorists rolled their eyes at the clacking, tangible, and seemingly slow methods of their rivals. You can almost hear the muttered insults. "What, are you still playing with rocks, old man?" Or, "At least my numbers don't vanish if the dog sneezes on the page." This wasn't just a friendly rivalry among mathematicians. It had real-world implications. In some places, using the new numerals was actually viewed with suspicion, partly because they were associated with Arab scholars and merchants. Remember how the Silk Road helped spread them. And partly because they were, well, different. People were wary of what they couldn't physically manipulate. Historians still argue whether the resistance to Hindu-Arabic numerals was purely practical, rooted in a comfort with existing methods, or also ingrained in a fear of foreign influence and a perceived complexity that felt less transparent than simply moving pebbles. The abacus, however, was undeniably practical. It democratized calculation to an extent. Not everyone could read or write, let alone grasp the abstract nature of zero or positional notation, but many could learn to slide counters. It was a tangible, hands-on method that didn't require expensive parchment or ink, or the ability to master complex written algorithms. Think of it. You could be a humble peddler, trading furs and honey, and with a basic counting board, you could ensure you weren't swindled by a cunning merchant from the next village over. This was crucial for the burgeoning merchant class, who were slowly but surely reshaping the economic landscape of Europe. You could almost call the abacus the first widely adopted portable calculator, albeit one that didn't fit in your pocket, unless you had very, very large pockets. And believe me, in a time when a bad calculation could mean ruin, debt peonage, or even being thrown into the local dungeon for failing to pay your dues, you probably wouldn't survive without some reliable way to count your coins. Miscalculate the price of that pig, and you might just end up trading your firstborn for a slightly moldy wheel of cheese, which, let's be honest, is practically a death sentence in medieval times. Counting correctly literally kept you alive and prosperous. It kept the wheels of commerce turning, allowing goods to flow, capital to accumulate, and eventually laying the groundwork for the great financial innovations of the Renaissance. It was a tedious, clunky, but utterly essential step in humanity's ongoing relationship with numbers. A relationship that, as you're starting to see, is far more dramatic and deeply interwoven with our survival than you might have initially imagined. You stand in the heart of Venice, a vibrant mosaic of canals and commerce. The year is, let's say, 1480. The salty tang of the lagoon mixes with the exotic scents of spices arriving from the east, a dizzying perfume of profit and possibility. Gondolas glide past, laden with goods, their rhythmic creak a counterpoint to the babel of languages echoing from the Rialto Bridge. You are not a gondolier, however, nor are you a wide-eyed tourist. No, you are a burgeoning merchant, perhaps a junior partner in a textile venture, your hands stained with indigo, your mind reeling from the day's transactions. The sheer volume of goods, the intricate web of credits and debts, the fluctuating exchange rates between ducats, florins, and guilders, it's enough to make your brain feel like a tangled ball of yarn. Gone are the days when a simple tally on a bone, or even the careful shifting of beads on a medieval abacus, could manage the full scope of your financial world. You remember those simple Roman ledgers, the straightforward in and out columns, almost quaint now, a child's plaything compared to this. The financial tide has turned, and if you don't learn to surf it, you'll drown in a sea of red ink. And let's be honest, if you were a small-time merchant trying to keep track of it all without these newfangled methods, you'd probably be bankrupt, exiled, or worse, dinner for a very well-fed rat within a fiscal quarter. The stakes are higher than ever, because with every ship that docks, with every caravan that arrives over the Alpine passes, the very fabric of European society is being rewoven by the threads of trade and finance. This isn't just about counting sheep anymore. It's about counting every strand of wool, every coin exchanged, every promise made, and every risk taken across vast, unpredictable distances. The air in the counting house is thick with the scent of parchment and lamp oil. Before you lies a magnificent, leather-bound ledger, its pages crisp and ready for your quill. This isn't just a book. It's the nervous system of your business, a chronicle of every financial heartbeat. You're not just noting down what you bought and what you sold. Oh no, that's far too simplistic for this brave new world of commerce. You're tracking assets, liabilities, equity, revenue, expenses. You're balancing columns, ensuring that for every debit there is an equal and opposite credit. This, my friend, is the magic, the revolution of double-entry bookkeeping. The man most famously associated with popularizing this system, the one whose work you consult daily, is a Franciscan friar by the name of Luca Pacioli. In 1494, he published Summa de Arithmetica, Geometria, Proportioni et Proportionalita, the Summa on Arithmetic, Geometry, Proportion, and Proportionality. Catchy title, right? While he didn't invent double-entry bookkeeping, which had been developing in Italian city-states for centuries, His Summa was the first printed work to describe the system in such clear, comprehensive detail. It was, in essence, the Renaissance equivalent of a For Dummies guide to advanced accounting, and it spread like wildfire across the merchant republics of Europe. You can almost hear the collective sigh of relief from beleaguered bookkeepers everywhere. Imagine trying to explain profit margins to your investors when your books are a mess. You'd be laughed out of the Doge's palace faster than you could say, unforeseen cargo spoilage. This wasn't merely an academic exercise. It was the engine that powered the complex businesses and banking empires of the Renaissance. Families like the Medici in Florence, who started as wool merchants, transformed into Europe's most powerful bankers, managing vast sums of money, financing wars, and even funding artistic masterpieces. How did they do it? Through meticulous, sophisticated counting. They understood that to lend money across borders, to invest in distant voyages, or to manage multiple branches of their bank, they needed an unimpeachable record of every single transaction. They couldn't just rely on a few notches on a stick or memory. Their reputation and their immense wealth depended on their ledgers. Consider for a moment the bill of exchange. This was a revolutionary financial instrument that allowed merchants to pay for goods in one city and receive payment in another, without having to physically transport vast quantities of gold or silver, which was, let's be frank, a logistical nightmare and an open invitation for bandits. You could draw a bill in Venice, sell it to a banker, who would then instruct his agent in Bruges to pay your supplier there. But to make this work, everyone needed absolute trust in the accounting behind it. Every bill, every payment, every interest calculation had to be precisely recorded, balanced, and reconciled. It's like a massive, interconnected spreadsheet, but instead of digital cells, you have hundreds of individual hands, quill pens scratching on parchment, guided by the principles laid down by Pacioli and refined by generations of shrewd merchants. A quirky little detail you might not consider is the actual physical security of these magnificent ledgers. These books weren't just tossed onto a shelf at the end of the day. Many merchant families employed dedicated clerks whose sole job was to guard the ledgers, sometimes even sleeping in the same room as the books. Some ledgers even had elaborate locks, or were stored in iron-bound chests, hidden away in secret chambers. Imagine the stress of losing an entire year's financial records in a fire or to a clever thief. It wasn't just a loss of data. It was the complete collapse of your financial identity. You might as well just pack up your silks and spices and become a humble shepherd. This meticulousness also extended to the nascent forms of corporate structures. While not yet the joint stock companies we know today, early partnerships and ventures in the Renaissance often involved multiple investors, each expecting a precise accounting of their share of the profits. You couldn't just eyeball it. Every penny had to be accounted for, to satisfy both the investors and, more importantly, the tax collectors, who were becoming increasingly sophisticated in their own counting methods. Trying to pull a fast one on the Venetian taxman was, let's just say, a hobby with extremely low survival rates. And it wasn't just trade. Governments themselves began to adopt these advanced accounting methods to manage their burgeoning state finances, to track tax revenues, and to fund increasingly expensive wars. The ability to forecast income and expenditure, to borrow money on a larger scale, and to manage public debt all relied on more robust counting systems. It transformed the very nature of governance, moving from a system of ad hoc levies to a more structured, financially driven administration. Historians still argue whether the widespread adoption of debellentry bookkeeping directly caused the economic boom of the Renaissance, or was merely a symptom of it. Was the innovation in accounting a catalyst that unleashed unprecedented economic growth? Or was it simply a necessary tool that evolved in response to already growing trade and financial complexity? Did the numbers create the revolution, or did the revolution demand better numbers? Regardless, what's clear is that the ability to count things, and to count them in a profoundly sophisticated way, became an indispensable tool for power, wealth, and influence. The foundations for modern capitalism, for the globalized economy you inhabit today, were meticulously laid, page by balanced page, in the flickering candlelight of a Venetian counting house. You are standing in a dimly lit workshop, the air thick with the scent of aged parchment and smoldering lamp oil. Outside, the world still mostly believes the sun revolves around you, a charming but utterly wrong assumption. But here, within these walls, something new is stirring, a quiet revolution of thought that hinges on something utterly mundane, yet profoundly powerful: counting. You peer through a crude brass telescope, its lenses imperfect, its mechanism stiff. The moon, a pockmarked pearl, swims into focus, and you find yourself counting its craters, tracing its shadows, mapping its imperfections with a precision that would have astounded those ancient Egyptians with their grand-scale calculations for pyramids. You are, in essence, becoming a counter of the cosmos. And frankly, if you voice your observations too loudly in certain circles, you probably won't survive this particular historical detour. Heresy, darling, is a swift exit strategy. This is the dawn of the scientific revolution, a period where the philosophical ponderings of the Greeks, the practical ledgers of the Romans, and the revolutionary void of zero from India all converged into a single, undeniable truth. To understand the universe, you had to count it. You had to measure it meticulously, repeatedly, and with an almost obsessive dedication. No longer was counting just for tracking your tribe's size, your harvest yields, or your burgeoning Silk Road trade. Now it was about peeling back the layers of reality itself, revealing the hidden mechanisms of nature. Think of Galileo Galilei, an icon of this era, not just for his audacious theories, but for his relentless counting. He didn't just look at the sky. He systematically observed, drawing detailed sketches of the moon's uneven surface, noting the waxing and waning of Venus's phases, and most famously, tracking the precise movements of Jupiter's 4 largest moons. He counted them night after night, charted their positions, and used these quantifiable observations to provide irrefutable evidence against the geocentric model. He wasn't simply saying, "I think this is happening." He was saying, "I've counted it. The numbers don't lie. Look for yourself." It was like bringing a meticulously kept spreadsheet to a philosophical debate, and suddenly the philosophers had to rethink their entire argument. This wasn't just about astronomy either. The spirit of quantification seeped into every nascent scientific discipline. In physics, you'd find yourself measuring the trajectory of cannonballs, the force of falling apples. Thanks, Sir Isaac, for the ultimate aha moment, though we can all agree your head probably didn't need to be involved, and the vibrations of plucked strings. Each observation became a data point, a number to be added to a growing ledger of the natural world. If you wanted to understand gravity, you didn't just theorize about it. You measured how fast things fell. If you wanted to understand light, you measured its angles and reflections. The challenge, of course, was how to measure with consistency and precision in a world still grappling with unified standards. Remember how standardizing measures revolutionized trade. Well, now it was revolutionizing understanding itself. Early scientists, in their desperate need for precision, would sometimes resort to truly ingenious and occasionally quite peculiar methods. Did you know that some early astronomers, in their fervent quest for accuracy, would actually count the beats of their own pulse to time celestial events? Imagine trying to get a consistent reading while simultaneously trying not to hyperventilate with excitement at a new discovery. Talk about a multitasking challenge, especially if you just had a double espresso. Your measurements would be all over the place. This era demanded new tools, not just the telescope, but increasingly accurate clocks, balances, thermometers, and barometers. Each new instrument was designed to convert a phenomenon into a number, to take the qualitative, it's hot, it's heavy, it's fast, and make it quantitative. It's 98 degrees. It weighs 5 pounds. It's moving at 30 miles per hour. This shift was monumental. It moved knowledge from the realm of abstract philosophy and anecdotal evidence into the domain of verifiable, repeatable facts. And all those facts, fundamentally, were built on counts and measurements. Suddenly, you weren't just observing a comet. You were calculating its orbit, predicting its return with incredible precision. You weren't just mixing chemicals. You were measuring the exact proportions, aiming to replicate results consistently. This was the birth of experimental science as we know it, where hypotheses were tested not just by logic, but by the cold, hard, measurable facts. It was a rigorous, often painstaking process, but the payoff was immense. The ability to unlock nature's fundamental laws. It's interesting to consider the intellectual lineage here. The Renaissance, with its booming trade and sophisticated accounting, had primed the world for a quantitative approach. The decimal system you encountered earlier, and the concept of zero, provided the bedrock upon which these complex calculations could be built. Without a flexible and robust numbering system, this scientific leap would have been significantly hampered, perhaps even impossible. Imagine trying to calculate planetary orbits using only Roman numerals. You'd still be adding up your first observation. Historians still argue whether the scientific revolution was a sudden, seismic shift, a dramatic break from ancient ways of thinking, or a more gradual evolution, built upon centuries of incremental advancements in mathematics and observation, perhaps even tracing back to the computational leaps made possible by the arrival of zero and the decimal system you encountered earlier. Was it a light switch flipping on, or was it a dimmer slowly being turned up over centuries? Regardless, one thing is clear. The moment counting ceased to be merely about inventory and began to be about inquiry, the world started to reveal its secrets at an unprecedented pace. You were no longer just counting things. You were counting on things on numbers to tell you the truth. You stand on the factory floor, a cacophony of gears and steam hissing around you, the rhythmic clatter of looms echoing through the vast, dimly lit space. The air is thick, a heavy blend of coal smoke, machine oil, and the faint, metallic tang of new production. Gone are the days of counting a few dozen sheep or a handful of scrolls. Now you're looking at hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of identical items, marching relentlessly off assembly lines. Your eyes scan the rows of intricate machinery, each churning out its piece of the puzzle, a symphony of industrial might. This isn't just about making things. It's about making lots of things quickly, cheaply, and uniformly. And to do that, you need numbers. A lot of numbers. Remember those early scribbles on bone or the clay tokens of Mesopotamia? They were quaint, almost artisanal in their simplicity. Now, you're in an era where the sheer volume of production demands an unprecedented level of numerical precision. Every cog, every bolt, every length of fabric must be accounted for. It's a relentless, mathematical ballet. And if you can't keep up, if you can't count with pinpoint accuracy, then the whole system grinds to a halt. You're breathing in air thick with lint and coal dust. And let's be honest, your life expectancy just took a nosedive compared to your agrarian ancestors who only worried about counting their chickens. Here, you're counting the number of seconds until a steam pipe bursts. The industrial age didn't just demand counting, it demanded systematic counting. Take raw materials, for instance. A textile mill needs mountains of raw cotton. How many bales arrived? How many went into production today? How much waste was generated? If you're off by even a small percentage, you could deplete your stock prematurely or, worse, overorder and tie up valuable capital. Managers, often former artisans themselves, quickly realized that the old, informal methods wouldn't scale. They needed precise ledgers, inventory tracking systems, and early forms of data analysis that, if presented to a Renaissance accountant, would probably make them faint from sheer numerical overload. Then there's the output. Imagine a factory producing buttons, not just a few hundred, but hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions, every single day. Each button needs to be identical, consistent in size, color, and quality. How do you ensure that? You count. You count the number of defective buttons per batch, the number of buttons produced per machine, the number of buttons packed per box. This constant measurement allowed factory owners to identify bottlenecks, improve machinery, and fine-tune their processes. It's the birth of quality control, driven not by artistic intuition, but by cold, hard numbers. This was a mainstream historical fact. The widespread adoption of interchangeable parts, famously championed by Eli Whitney, hinged entirely on the ability to manufacture components to incredibly precise measurements, and then count them accurately to ensure every assembly had the right pieces. Without numbers, the assembly line simply couldn't exist. Beyond materials and finished goods, the human element also became numerically defined. Workers were no longer just individuals performing tasks. They were units of labor, their output measured, their efficiency scrutinized. Time and motion studies, rudimentary at first, began to emerge, timing how long it took a worker to perform a specific task, how many items they produced in an hour. This wasn't just about wages. It was about maximizing throughput. If one worker could stitch 50 shirts in an hour and another only 40, management wanted to know why. And the answer, inevitably, lay in the numbers. This ushered in a new era of management, where human effort became quantifiable. Historians still argue whether this drive for numerical efficiency primarily led to worker exploitation, or was a necessary step towards democratizing access to goods through mass production, making previously luxury items affordable for the average person. A quirky tidbit from this era involves early attempts at scientific management, and the lengths to which some innovators went. Picture this: a factory overseer in the mid-19th century, meticulously counting the number of steps a specific worker took each day, trying to optimize their route between different stations on the factory floor. They'd graph these steps, analyze patterns, all in the pursuit of shaving a few seconds off the production of each item. It sounds almost comical now, like trying to count the number of times your cat judges you in a day, but it was a serious endeavor. This obsessive counting of movements was a precursor to the time and motion studies that would truly blossom later. But the seeds were sown in the early factory floors, driven by the relentless ticking of clocks and the desire for more, always more, output. The elegance of the decimal system, which you remember spreading along the Silk Road, proved perfectly suited for the demands of industrial accounting. No more clumsy Roman numerals for tracking inventory of thousands of spindles of yarn. No, you needed a system that could easily handle large quantities, fractions, and percentages for calculating wages, profits, and material consumption. This era also saw the professionalization of accounting, moving beyond the simple double-entry bookkeeping of the Renaissance. Now, entire departments were dedicated to crunching numbers, generating reports, and providing the raw data upon which the titans of industry made their decisions. Without the ability to precisely count every input and output, the vast, interconnected network of suppliers, factories, and markets simply could not have functioned. The numbers didn't just support the system, they were the system. You're standing on the cobblestones of a bustling 17th century London street. The air is thick with the smell of coal smoke and damp earth. The cries of street vendors echo, and overhead, the sky is a perpetually shifting tapestry of gray. A nagging cough has settled in your chest, a familiar companion these days. You watch a cart rumble by, piled high with coffins, and a shiver, unrelated to the damp, runs down your spine. Death, you see, is not an abstract concept here. It's a constant, visible presence, a silent, unblinking observer of every transaction, every hurried step. If you were living in this era, clinging to life with nothing more than hope and questionable elixirs, you probably won't survive your next serious illness. Your odds, frankly, would be grim. But even amidst this pervasive uncertainty, a new kind of counting was stirring. A quiet revolution born not of necessity for harvests or taxes, but of a profound, almost desperate human need to understand, to predict, to somehow tame the wild, unpredictable beast of the future. This wasn't about counting how many sheep you owned, or how many bricks built the cathedral. This was about counting possibilities, about quantifying the very concept of maybe. Think back to those massive ledgers we discussed, the ones tracking trade and empire. Well, a draper in London named John Graunt, in the mid-1600s, took those everyday records, the bills of mortality, and did something truly groundbreaking. These bills, originally compiled to track plague deaths, and probably to ensure the undertakers had enough work, were just raw counts of births, deaths, and causes. But Graunt, with a curious mind, started looking for patterns. He wasn't just tallying the dead. He was, for the first time, seeing the living and the dying in broad strokes. He noticed that more boys were born than girls, that infant mortality was horrifyingly high, and that certain diseases peaked at certain times. He published his observations in 1662, in a slim volume titled Natural and Political Observations Made Upon the Bills of Mortality. It sounds terribly dry, doesn't it? Like a pamphlet on optimal cabbage fermentation. But this wasn't just a list of numbers. It was the birth of what we now call demography, and a critical step towards understanding populations, not just individuals. It's like discovering that while you can't predict your next cough, you can predict how many coughs will happen in London next winter. While Graunt was busy tallying deaths elsewhere across the Channel, a rather different kind of counting was taking hold, driven by a much more exhilarating and often ruinous human pursuit. Gambling. Imagine you're in a smoky Parisian salon, the clink of coins filling the air as a dice game gets heated. Two prominent mathematicians, Blaise Pascal and Pierre de Fermat, were corresponding about a specific problem posed by a French nobleman, Chevalier de Marais, who was vexed by how to fairly divide stakes in an interrupted game of chance. Their letters, sparked by dice rolls and card shuffles, laid the very foundations of probability theory. It's ironic, isn't it? The grand edifice of modern statistics, used to predict climate change and design life-saving drugs, has its roots in someone wanting to know if they could win big at craps. This new understanding of probability quickly found a very practical application: insurance. Remember the ships sailing into the unknown? Before, insuring them was mostly guesswork, a risky gamble for both sides. But now, with a nascent understanding of how many ships actually sank, or how many people of a certain age actually died, it became possible to calculate premiums with a degree of rationality. The coffee houses of London, particularly Lloyd's, became centers where merchants and underwriters would gather, their deals underpinned by these new probabilistic insights. You weren't just betting on a ship. You were betting on a statistical likelihood. It transformed commerce from pure chance to calculated risk. Beyond trade, this new way of counting permeated the burgeoning world of science. Isaac Newton, for all his monumental contributions to physics, still operated in a world where uncertainty was often qualitative. But as scientists began to collect more data on astronomical observations, on chemical reactions, on biological variations, they needed tools to make sense of it all. How do you distinguish a real pattern from random noise? How do you know if your experiment's result is truly significant or just a fluke? Statistics provided the framework for answering these questions. It allowed scientists to move beyond mere observation to drawing conclusions with measurable confidence, to say, there's a 95% chance this isn't just a coincidence. It's the difference between saying, I think this apple will fall, and saying, this apple will fall, and I can predict its trajectory with astonishing precision, unless a particularly strong gust of wind intervenes, which has a 0.01% chance of happening. The impact wasn't confined to science labs or trading floors. Governments, increasingly complex and demanding, also started to embrace this quantitative approach to understanding their populations. How many people lived in their cities? How many were poor? How many were of military age? Early censuses, while rudimentary, were the first steps in this direction. This wasn't just about curiosity. It was about power and planning. If you know how many people are in your kingdom, you know how many soldiers you can raise, how much tax you can collect, and how much grain you'll need to feed everyone. It transformed governance from a series of educated guesses to an increasingly data-driven enterprise. This shift from absolute certainty to quantified uncertainty was profound. It challenged long-held philosophical views that mathematics dealt only with perfect, ideal forms. Now, numbers were grappling with the messy, unpredictable realities of life. Historians still argue whether this move to quantify uncertainty truly demystified the world, or if it simply replaced one form of mystery with another, more complex statistical one. Were we truly gaining control, or just building more elaborate models of our inherent lack of it? It certainly changed how you perceived your own life. You were no longer just an individual. You were also a data point, one tiny entry in a vast, probabilistic spreadsheet of humanity. As centuries rolled on, the tools of statistics became more sophisticated. Adolphe Quetelet, a Belgian astronomer and statistician in the 19th century, applied statistical methods to social phenomena, famously coining the term el homme moyen, the average man. He analyzed crime rates, marriage rates, and even suicide rates, searching for underlying patterns, much to the discomfort of those who preferred to see human behavior as purely a matter of free will. It was, in a way, the ultimate extension of counting not just events, but human tendencies. Suddenly, your personal choices, viewed from a high enough vantage point, began to look suspiciously like a predictable statistical distribution. It's a bit like watching a flock of birds. You can't predict what one bird will do, but you can predict the general movement of the flock. This new lens on reality, born from death records and dice games, would continue to expand, shaping everything from political polls to medical trials, from economic forecasts to the very algorithms that decide what ads you see online. The next time you find yourself wondering about the odds of something happening, whether it's winning the lottery or getting caught in traffic, remember these early pioneers. They weren't just counting things. They were counting on things, and in doing so, they opened up a whole new way of understanding the world and our precarious place within it. And perhaps even how to make that place a little less precarious, one probability at a time. The desire to tame the unknown, to put a number on it, became an insatiable quest, one that continues to this very day, drawing you further into a world defined by its averages and its outliers. You stand in a vast, echoing hall, the air thick with the smell of ozone and the rhythmic thunk-thunk-thunk of precise machinery. It's a sound that promises progress, a percussive beat ushering in an entirely new era of counting. Before you, a towering cabinet hums, its surface dotted with small, glowing lights that flicker with an arcane language. This isn't just about counting apples or livestock anymore. This is about counting electrical impulses, about the silent, rapid-fire dance of presence and absence, on and off. You feel the subtle vibration through the floorboards, a tangible pulse of a new kind of intelligence taking root. Think back to those early tallies, the notches on bones, the tokens in Mesopotamia, the abacus in medieval markets. All of them relied on physical representations, tangible items you could hold, move, or see. But here, in this humming temple of computation, the numbers are ephemeral, flickering into existence as currents surge and fade. This is where the world started speaking binary, whether it knew it or not. Our journey into digital counting really kicks off with something surprisingly low-tech: the humble punch card. Imagine a stiff piece of cardboard, perhaps the size of a standard index card, perforated with rows and columns. Each tiny hole, or the lack of a hole, represented a piece of data. It was a physical manifestation of a binary choice: whole or no hole, 1 or 0. This wasn't some sudden futuristic leap. Its roots were firmly planted in the mechanical loom invented by Joseph Marie Jacquard way back in 1801. That ingenious Frenchman used punched cards to control the intricate patterns woven by his looms, making complex designs repeatable and automated. It was, in essence, the first program. If you ever thought knitting was complicated, try programming a loom with hundreds of these cards. You'd probably end up with a very artistic, albeit useless, scarf. This seemingly simple idea of encoding information through holes caught the eye of a statistician named Herman Hollerith in the late 19th century. The United States Census Bureau was drowning in data. The 1880 census had taken 7 years to process manually, and projections suggested the 1890 census would take even longer, perhaps rendering the data obsolete before it was even tallied. Hollerith saw the future in those punched cards. He developed an electrical tabulating machine that could read the holes in the cards, count them, and sort them. Suddenly, what took years could be done in months. The 1890 census was completed in just 1 year, an astounding feat of efficiency for its time. This was a mainstream historical fact that completely reshaped how governments and businesses would collect and process information. You can almost hear the sighs of relief from countless government clerks who, thanks to Hollerith, probably got to go home on time for once. The transition from these electromechanical marvels to truly electronic computing was a gradual one, marked by giant leaps in technology. Instead of relying on mechanical relays that physically opened and closed circuits, engineers began to experiment with vacuum tubes. These glass bulbs, similar to old radio tubes, could switch electrical currents on and off far faster than any mechanical switch. Imagine a light switch flipping on and off thousands of times a second. That's the kind of speed we're talking about. This was the birth of the electronic gate, the fundamental building block of all modern digital logic. This is where binary truly shines. You see, the elegance of counting with electricity isn't in representing 10 distinct states, like our decimal system, but in just 2, on or off, true or false, 1 or 0. It's the ultimate simplicity, a concept that underpins every single digital device you interact with today. Your phone, your computer, that smart toothbrush you probably own, they're all just incredibly fast ones and zeros dancing around, millions, even billions of times a second. Trying to count with only ones and zeros might seem cumbersome to you, with your 10 fingers and easily bored attention span, but for a machine, it's perfect. No ambiguity, no complex calculations, just pure, unadulterated logic. It's like having a conversation with someone who only ever answers yes or no. Very efficient, if a little dull. Early electronic computers were monstrosities. Machines like ENIAC, Electronic Numerical Integrator and Computer, completed in 1945, weighed 30 tons, occupied 1,800 square feet, and consumed enough electricity to power a small town. It contained over 17,000 vacuum tubes, and if you stood next to it, the heat emanating from those glowing tubes would be intense. One quirky tidbit from this era involves Grace Hopper, a pioneering computer scientist. In 1947, while working on the Harvard Mark II computer, her team found that a persistent error was caused by a moth trapped in a relay. They taped the actual moth into the logbook, coining the term debugging for the act of fixing computer problems. So next time your computer acts up, just remember, it might literally have a bug. And frankly, you probably wouldn't survive trying to find a moth in 17,000 vacuum tubes without going completely mad. Historians still argue whether the concept of binary truly blossomed with Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz in the late 17th century, who saw its elegance and connection to ancient Chinese divination, or if its practical application in digital machines was an independent conceptual leap. What's undeniable, however, is that as machines began to count with electrical impulses, the binary system, with its beautiful simplicity of ones and zeros, became the universal language of computation. It meant that all the diverse counting methods we've explored, from the grouping of 5s and 10s to the abstract elegance of 0, could finally be translated into a single, unambiguous language that machines could understand and process at incredible speeds, propelling us toward a truly digital dawn. You find yourself awash in a sea of numbers, a digital current so vast it beggars the imagination. It's no longer just punch cards whirring in the background, feeding precise instructions into hulking mainframes. Oh no. Now every blink, every click, every casual scroll of your thumb across a screen generates a ripple, a data point in an ocean that grows exponentially, minute by minute. You're not just interacting with a system. You're being cataloged by it, gently, perpetually, in ways you barely perceive. Consider the very air around you. If it weren't for the sheer volume of data about atmospheric conditions, traffic patterns, and even your own digital footprint, navigating your morning commute would be less a journey and more an act of pure, unadulterated faith. This isn't just counting individual apples or cows anymore. This is counting every atom in every apple, every hair on every cow, and then predicting what those apples and cows might do next. Welcome to the era where big data isn't just a buzzword. It's the invisible architecture of your modern existence, orchestrating everything from the ads you see to the routes your delivery drivers take. And let's be honest, you probably won't survive this without at least one algorithmic recommendation for a new pair of slippers you didn't even know you needed. You remember that crocodile dung sunscreen from way back when. Imagine if every historical moment, every tiny detail of human invention had been meticulously recorded, digitized, and fed into an immense global database. That's the scale we're talking about now. From the moment the internet became widely accessible, a truly mind-boggling phenomenon began. The voluntary, enthusiastic, and often unwitting self-documentation of humanity. Suddenly millions, then billions, of people were generating content, interacting, buying, selling, and sharing, all leaving behind a digital trail. This explosion wasn't just about the quantity of data, but its variety and velocity. Think about it. A single online transaction involves your name, address, credit card number, the item purchased, the time of purchase, your IP address, your browser type, even how long you hovered over that Buy Now button. Multiply that by billions of transactions a day. Suddenly, the simple act of tracking stock in a medieval marketplace seems quaint, doesn't it? This colossal accumulation of information is what we term big data, a concept that fully blossomed in the early 21st century as computational power finally caught up with our insatiable desire to connect and consume digitally. It's the moment when counting wasn't just about keeping track, but about drawing insights and making predictions on an unprecedented scale. This isn't just about corporations tracking your shopping habits, though they certainly do that with a terrifying precision. Big data permeates almost every facet of modern life. Urban planners analyze traffic flow data to optimize city infrastructure. Medical researchers crunch genomic data to understand diseases at a molecular level, tailoring treatments with a specificity unimaginable even a few decades ago. Even climate scientists rely on vast data sets from satellites, sensors, and historical records to model environmental changes, allowing us to predict weather patterns and understand global warming trends. Though whether we act on those predictions is, of course, a whole other ball game. You could say we've gone from counting grains of sand to counting every characteristic of every grain of sand, including its potential trajectory if a tiny breeze blows past it. One particularly quirky tidbit is how data analysis revealed a correlation between bad weather and increased sales of specific snack foods. Apparently, when it's dreary outside, you're more likely to reach for a specific brand of comfort food. Who knew your potato chip preference was being tracked by the weather forecast? It's enough to make you wonder if your fridge is judging your life choices. The tools used to wrangle this leviathan of information are equally fascinating. We moved beyond simple databases to distributed computing systems, cloud storage, and sophisticated algorithms designed to sift through petabytes and exabytes of data. These algorithms, often powered by machine learning and artificial intelligence, aren't just counting. They're learning from the data, identifying patterns, and making inferences. They can predict your next favorite song, your next potential purchase, or even, some claim, your next political leaning. This shift represents a fundamental change in how we approach knowledge itself. No longer are we always forming hypotheses, and then looking for data to confirm or deny them. Often, the data itself reveals unexpected correlations and insights that we then try to understand. Historians still argue whether the advent of big data truly represents a new paradigm shift in human understanding, or simply an exponential acceleration of the counting and categorization impulses that have driven us since those first notches on bones. Is it a leap forward in intelligence, or just an incredibly efficient way to categorize our collective obsession with cat videos? The answer, of course, is probably yes to both. The pervasive nature of this data collection means that your digital shadow is almost as substantial as your physical one, perhaps even more so, since it exists in countless servers across the globe, an eternal echo of your online presence. Every scroll, every click, every pause, it's all being counted, analyzed, and used to paint an ever more detailed picture of you. And it's not slowing down. You drift now, not through the dust of ancient markets or the chill of a medieval counting house, but through the shimmering, invisible currents of pure information. Feel it. That subtle hum that vibrates through the very air around you. The faint warmth of billions upon billions of calculations happening every nanosecond. You are a ghost in a machine, a fleeting thought in a universal consciousness built not of neurons, but of silicon and light. Every breath you take, every blink of your eye, every tiny shift in the ambient temperature of your room, it's all being counted. Not by a person, not even by a particularly diligent government clerk, but by a network so vast, so interconnected, it borders on the cosmic. This isn't just about tracking your steps or recommending your next binge watch, though rest assured, that's happening too. Oh, and by the way, you probably won't survive this computational tidal wave with your privacy intact. Let's be honest. We've come a long way from notches on bones, haven't we? From those first tentative marks made by a hunter-gatherer to keep track of the day's kill, to the quiet, ceaseless hum of a global network that counts the very atoms in a data center, or the probabilities of a quantum particle. Remember those Mesopotamian tokens, little clay shapes representing sheep or bushels of grain? Simple, tangible counts. Now the tokens are abstract, swirling eddies in a sea of algorithms, representing not just sheep, but the subtle shifts in global climate patterns, the collective sentiment of a billion social media posts, or the intricate dance of proteins within a single cell. The future of counting is here, and it's less about us counting, and more about it counting. It being the collective intelligence of artificial systems that are now engaged in what we might call hypercounting. They are discerning patterns in data sets so astronomically vast that if you tried to scroll through them, you'd be dead of old age before you even made it past the first megabyte. Think about the mainstream fact of our time. Just in the last decade, the sheer volume of digital data created and consumed has surpassed all data generated in human history up to that point. And it's growing exponentially. We're talking zettabytes, yottabytes, even brontobytes, terms that sound more like mythical beasts than units of measurement. These systems aren't just tallying individual items. They're counting relationships, correlations, emerging properties, and even future possibilities with a precision and speed that is utterly beyond human capacity. Consider the quirky or fringe tidbit of a digital twin, not just a virtual model of a factory or a city, but perhaps even a precise, constantly updated numerical representation of you. Every heartbeat, every dietary choice, every neural firing, meticulously counted and simulated in a virtual space. This digital counterpart could be used to predict your health outcomes, optimize your environment, or even, perhaps, keep counting after your biological self has ceased to. It's a level of counting that blurs the lines between data and existence, a concept that would have baffled even the most abstract Greek philosophers who first pondered numbers beyond mere things. And this leads us to the heart of the matter for our future, the very idea of comprehension. When you look at the raw output of a deep learning algorithm that has identified complex patterns in a vast ocean of medical imagery, it presents its findings. But can you truly understand how it arrived at that conclusion? The steps, the intermediate counts, the millions of weighted connections are often opaque, a black box of computation. This is where philosophers still ponder whether true understanding can ever emerge from pure computation, or if counting, no matter how advanced, remains merely a tool, forever separate from genuine human insight. It's a delightful thought to consider as you drift off, isn't it? That the very act of counting might be moving beyond our own comprehension, like trying to count the number of stars in a galaxy by hand. The jokes flow easily when you realize that these systems already know what you're thinking before you do. For instance, your smart fridge probably counts the remaining quantity of your favorite snack faster than you can even think about going to the kitchen. Or how about the algorithms that count the precise moment your attention span is about to wane during an online video? They're practically mind readers, which is both impressive and a little bit creepy. And don't get me started on the self-driving cars, counting every millimeter of road, every blink of a pedestrian, making decisions faster than you could say, oops. It makes you wonder if our species' greatest contribution will eventually be teaching machines how to count themselves out of a job. The universe, in a sense, has always been counting. The spin of electrons, the decay of atoms, the expansion of space itself, all governed by underlying numerical principles. But now, we have built tools that can perceive and process these cosmic counts at scales previously unimaginable. From the binary bits of the digital dawn, remember those punch cards that first started our electrical counting, to the quantum bits that promise to unlock computations currently beyond our wildest dreams. The trajectory is clear. Counting will never, ever stop. It will continue to evolve, to deepen, to encompass more and more of reality, until the distinction between the observer and the observed, the counter and the counted, might begin to fade. But for now, as the gentle hum of the world's countless calculations softens around you, let your mind drift from these vast, abstract concepts. Allow the immensity of future counting to become a distant echo, like the final ripples of a stone dropped into a calm lake. Feel the comforting weight of your blanket, the steady rhythm of your own breath, a count that is entirely yours, entirely present. The journey through the history of counting, from simple tallies on bones to the complex algorithms that now orchestrate our digital world, reminds us of the endless human curiosity that drives us to understand, to quantify, to make sense of our surroundings. And while the future promises counts beyond our wildest imaginings, remember that at its core, Counting has always been a way to bring order, to bring understanding, and often, to bring a quiet sense of peace to the chaotic dance of existence. Tonight, as the moonlight filters softly through your window, let the numbers recede. Let the data streams dissolve into stardust. There is no need to count the sheep tonight, for the very universe is counting for you in ways we can barely comprehend. You are held within this vast, numerical embrace, a tiny, precious part of an infinite calculation. Feel safe, feel secure, knowing that every single moment, every quiet breath is perfectly accounted for within the grand design. Let the final thoughts of complex systems and future algorithms gently fade, replaced by the simple, comforting presence of now. The counting can wait until morning. For now, there is only stillness and the promise of rest. A sweet dreams.